She snatched the federal document right out of his hand and tore it in half. Not once, twice. Then dropped the pieces on the floor like they were trash. The entire terminal went dead silent. And the man standing there, he didn't yell, didn't reach for his phone, didn't even flinch. He just looked at her calm as a runway on a clear morning, bent down, picked up every single piece, and slipped them into his jacket pocket. That should have been her first warning. But Officer Rebecca Lawson had no idea she'd just destroyed the only thing standing between her and the worst day of her career. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss where this goes. The morning. Daniel Carter pulled into Westbridge Regional Airport. The fog was sitting low and thick over the tarmac, the kind that swallowed the windsocks whole and made the runway lights look like candles burning underwater. He drove a 2009 Ford F-150 with a cracked side mirror, a paint job that had given up somewhere around 2018, and a back seat that still had a booster seat in it, even though Lily had outgrown it 2 years ago. He just hadn't gotten around to taking it out. He hadn't gotten around to a lot of things since Sarah died. He parked in the short-term lot, not because he planned to be there long, but because he knew exactly how long this would take. 37 minutes, if everything went right. He'd done this inspection circuit 18 times in the last decade. He knew the rhythm. He grabbed his jacket off the passenger seat. It was a brown canvas work jacket worn at the elbows with a small American flag patch sewn on the left arm, faded from too many washes. Beneath it, he wore a plain gray thermal and dark work pants. No uniform, no stars on his collar, no nameplate. Just a man who looked like he fixed things for a living. Which in a way he did. He pulled out the federal authorization document from his inside breast pocket, a single folded sheet of government-grade paper with the Air Force seal embossed at the top, his clearance level printed in 2-point bold, and a barcode at the bottom that would pull up his full profile the moment anyone ran it. He'd carried documents like this for 23 years. They'd gotten him into air bases in 3 countries, 2 of which he still couldn't name in public company. He also clipped his radio to his belt. It was a secure military communications unit compact. Matte black, looked almost like a regular Motorola if you didn't know what you were looking at. And most people didn't. He took a slow breath of the cold morning air and walked toward the security gate. The gate at Westbridge wasn't glamorous. It was the side entrance used by aviation personnel, maintenance crews, and authorized federal inspectors. A narrow corridor of chain link and cinder block, with a single security booth staffed by 2 officers and a digital clearance scanner. Daniel had been through gates like this 1,000 times. He walked up, nodded at the young officer behind the scanner. Early 20s, a little nervous looking with a name tag that read Bennett, and placed the authorization document on the counter. "Morning," Daniel said. "Daniel Carter, here for a runway systems inspection. Air Force coordination. You should have a flag on the manifest." Noah Bennett picked up the document. He was thorough. Daniel could see that immediately. The kid actually read it top to bottom, then turned it over and ran it through the scanner. The machine beeped twice. Green light. Noah looked up, and there was something in his face, not suspicion, but a kind of quiet surprise. Like a person who'd been told to expect a general and instead found someone who looked like their uncle. "Yes, sir, Mr. Carter. Everything checks out. You're clear to..." "What exactly do you think you're doing?" The voice came from the side booth. Officer Rebecca Lawson stepped out from behind the door she'd been leaning against. Arms crossed, eyes, already making a decision. She was mid-40s, solid build, with the kind of expression that had been trained by years of being in charge of a very small space and making the most of it. She looked at Daniel the way some people looked at a car in the wrong parking spot. Not with curiosity, with irritation. "Who are you?" she said. Not a question, a challenge. "Daniel Carter," he said, same even tone. "Federal Runway Inspection, Air Force Coordination. Your scanner already confirmed the clearance." She looked at Noah. "Put it back through." "Ma'am, I just ran it. It's..." "Put it back through." Noah ran it again. Green light. Again. Rebecca didn't look at the screen. She was looking at Daniel, at his jacket, at his truck through the window, at the booster seat she probably couldn't even see, but somehow had already decided was there. That document, she said, stepping toward the counter. Looks printed. It is printed, Daniel said. That's how federal documents work. I mean, it looks like something you printed at home. There was a half-second of silence. Noah kept his eyes on the counter. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Would you like to verify it before making a decision? Rebecca almost smiled. I don't need to verify anything. I've worked security for 11 years. I know what a legitimate federal document looks like. Then you know that one is legitimate. I know that anyone with a home printer in 40 minutes can make something that looks legitimate. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Badge number? Her eyes narrowed. Excuse me. Your badge number. I'd like to note it for the record. You'd like to note it. She almost laughed. Sir, I don't know who told you that document was real or who helped you put it together, but you are not going through this gate. The scanner confirmed. The scanner is not my authority. I am the authority at this gate. And I'm telling you, you are not an authorized federal inspector. You look like you came here to fix a conveyor belt. There was a sound. Then a few people behind Daniel at the gate. A maintenance worker or two who'd been waiting their turn, a baggage handler who'd stopped to watch. Nobody was moving. Daniel didn't turn around. He kept his eyes on Rebecca. I want to be clear about something. Everything happening at this gate right now is being recorded by the security cameras over your left shoulder and your right shoulder. My authorization document has already been verified by your scanner twice, and I've asked for your badge number, which you haven't provided. Rebecca stepped around the counter. She came up to the other side and she held out her hand. Give me the document. Daniel looked at her hand, then at her face. You want me to hand you a federal document that you've already said you believe is fake? I want to examine it. You can examine it where it is. Give me the document or I call the police. You are the police. A beat. Someone in the small crowd behind Daniel made a sound, almost a laugh, quickly swallowed. Rebecca's jaw tightened. She reached forward and took the document from the counter where Noah had placed it after the second scan. She looked at it. Really looked at it this time. The seal, the clearance codes, the barcode still showing green on the scanner beside her. And then she tore it. Not hesitantly, not accidentally. She gripped it with both hands and tore it down the middle, and then she tore it again, and she dropped the pieces on the floor between them. That, she said, is what I think of fake federal documents. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. Noah Bennett had gone completely still. The maintenance workers behind Daniel had gone completely still. The baggage handler's mouth was slightly open. Daniel looked down at the pieces of paper on the floor. He crouched slowly without any urgency and picked up each piece. All 4 of them. He straightened up, took his time folding them together, and placed them in his inside breast pocket. Same pocket he'd taken the document from. Then he looked at Rebecca. You just destroyed the evidence that would have protected you, he said. His voice was quiet. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even particularly emotional. It was just a fact stated by a man who dealt in facts. Rebecca opened her mouth. And then Daniel's radio activated. It wasn't loud. It was a precise, controlled burst of tone, the kind of signal that doesn't happen on commercial frequencies. And then a voice came through the speaker, clear and professional, and carrying the unmistakable weight of someone who was used to being listened to. Air Force Command to Eagle Actual. Confirm your status. Over. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Rebecca's hand, which had been rising to gesture at Daniel, froze mid-air. Noah's head came up slowly. Daniel unclipped the radio from his belt. He pressed the button. Eagle Actual reads you command. Status is delayed. Gate obstruction. Over. A pause. Just 2 or 3 seconds. Copy Eagle Actual. Do you require support? Daniel looked at Rebecca. She was staring at the radio the way you stare at something that just changed the ground beneath your feet. Stand by command, Daniel said. He clipped the radio back to his belt. I'm going to ask you one more time for your badge number, officer. Rebecca said nothing. Last name is fine if you prefer. Still nothing. Lawson, Noah said very quietly. He wasn't looking up. Her name is Lawson, badge 2247. Rebecca turned to him sharply. Bennett, He verified my credentials twice, ma'am, Noah said. His voice was shaking slightly, but he held it. The scanner confirmed, both times. What happened in the next 4 minutes would be talked about at Westbridge Regional for a long time. Not because anyone raised their voice. Daniel never raised his voice. Not because anyone threatened anyone. He never made a threat. It was the way he moved, the way he pulled out his personal cell phone and made one call, said 7 words, and listened for 12 seconds before hanging up. The way he then unclipped his radio again and gave command a brief update without any hint of frustration or drama. The way he stood exactly where he was standing and did not take one single step backward. Within 4 minutes, the gate supervisor's phone rang. Within 6, the airport operations director was walking briskly through the terminal toward the gate, his face doing complicated things. Within 9, a second call came through Daniel's radio, not the check-in from command, but a different voice, higher up. The kind of voice that made people straighten their spines without thinking about it. Eagle Actual, this is General Hartwell's office. We're aware of the situation. A formal confirmation of your credentials will be transmitted to Westbridge Airport Security within the next 3 minutes. Stand by. Daniel pressed transmit. Copy that. Thank you. He clipped the radio back to his belt and looked at Rebecca Lawson. She had not moved. She was standing where she'd been standing when she tore the document, and her face had traveled through several different countries of expression in the last 9 minutes and had not yet found a place to settle. I don't understand, she said finally. It came out quiet, almost like she was talking to herself. I know, Daniel said. She stopped, started again. You're really Colonel Daniel Carter, he said. Retired active duty, currently serving as Senior Federal Aviation Systems Inspector, Air Force Coordination Division. I have been doing this work for 11 years since leaving active command. But you? She gestured vaguely. At his jacket. At the window. At the general shape of him. Drive an old truck, Daniel finished for her. Yes. Why? Daniel picked up his authorization papers, the torn pieces from his pocket, and set them gently on the counter. Because the runway doesn't care about my truck, he said. The landing gear doesn't care about my jacket. When I walk this tarmac, I'm not walking it as a colonel. I'm walking it as the person responsible for making sure the systems work. And systems don't care about titles. They only care about whether the work gets done right. Rebecca looked at the torn pieces of paper on the counter. The airport operations director had arrived. His name was Gerald Foss. He was sweating slightly through his collar, and he looked at the torn document, and then at Daniel, and then at Rebecca, and back at the document with the expression of a man doing math he didn't like the answer to. Colonel Carter, he said, I want to personally apologize. Director Foss, Daniel said, turning to him. The apology can wait. What cannot wait is the inspection. I'm here because there's an Air Force transport due into this airport in under 6 hours, and I need to walk your emergency runway systems before it lands. Can you make that happen? Gerald Foss looked at Rebecca Lawson one more time, a look that contained multitudes, and then straightened up. Yes, sir, absolutely. Daniel walked the inspection circuit. He walked it exactly the way he'd walked 100 circuits before, methodically without hurry, checking every junction and sensor and backup relay with the same quiet focus. He had a notebook. A real paper, notebook spiral-bound with a mechanical pencil. He wrote things in it in a small, precise hand. Noah Bennett had been assigned to accompany him. They didn't talk much at first. Noah was still processing. He had that look young people get when the world has just shifted slightly, and they're waiting to see if it shifts back. After about 10 minutes of walking, Daniel stopped at a relay junction and crouched down to look at the housing bracket. You did the right thing, he said, not looking up. Back there at the gate. Noah didn't say anything for a moment. I don't know if that's true, sir. She's Officer Lawson. There's a lot of history there, in this airport. Her family. I know about her family, Daniel said. He made a note. Doesn't change what you did. I could have said something the first time, when she told me to run it through again. You could have. I didn't. No. Daniel stood up. But when it counted, you said her name and badge number when a man needed it. That mattered. Noah was quiet. Integrity, Daniel said, moving to the next junction, isn't about never being afraid. You're always going to be afraid of something. Consequences, embarrassment, losing the ground you're standing on. Integrity is about what you choose when fear is the loudest voice in the room. Noah walked beside him for a moment. Were you afraid back there at the gate? Daniel almost smiled. No. How come? Because I knew what I had. The document was real. The clearance was real. The radio was real. When you know what you're standing on, you don't have to be afraid of someone trying to convince you it isn't there. He paused at the next junction. The scary moments are when you're not sure. That's what you practice for. By the time Daniel reached the fourth section of the inspection circuit, the emergency runway backup systems, the sequenced lighting, the foam suppression infrastructure, he stopped walking. He stood there looking at a maintenance panel that was bolted shut with the wrong gauge bolts showing a service sticker dated 11 months ago. He opened his notebook. He made a note. Then he made several more. When was the last full service on these systems? He asked. Noah checked the manifest on his tablet. According to the records, 8 months ago. And before that, 14 months before that. Daniel was very still for a moment. That's not right. That's what the records show, sir. I know what the records show. He looked at the panel, at the bolts, at the dust on the housing that shouldn't have been there if an inspection had been done 8 months ago. The records are wrong. Noah looked at the panel. What do you mean wrong? I mean someone wrote down that this inspection happened, Daniel said quietly, and it didn't happen. He took out his phone and photographed the panel, the bolts, the service sticker, the dust. He photographed the bolt pattern, which showed no indication that the housing had been opened in at least a year. Then he photographed the next panel. Same story. And the next. He walked the full circuit without saying much. His notebook filled with small, careful notes. His phone filled with photographs. And with every junction he cleared or flagged, something was building behind his eyes. Not anger exactly, but something colder and more purposeful. By the time he finished, he had documented 41 discrepancies between the official maintenance records and the actual condition of the systems. 41. An Air Force transport was landing in less than 6 hours. Daniel walked back to the operations center, where Director Foss was waiting with 2 senior airport executives and a woman from the communications office, who had not stopped refreshing something on her tablet since he'd walked in. He set his notebook on the table. Your emergency runway systems have not been properly maintained in at least 14 months, he said. Possibly longer. The service records have been falsified. I've documented 41 discrepancies between what is written and what is actually present on the tarmac. The room got very quiet. One of the executives, a man named Harrison Burke, based on the nameplate, started to say something. Mr. Burke, Daniel said without raising his voice, I would think very carefully before you finished that sentence. Burke did not finish the sentence. I'm placing a temporary hold on the Air Force transport, Daniel said. It will not land until these systems are certified. That certification will require a full emergency inspection team, which I am authorizing right now. He looked at Director Foss. You have personnel who knew about this. You have personnel who signed off on inspections that didn't happen. That's federal falsification of aviation safety records. Those personnel need to be identified and removed from duty before this airport clears another military transport. Foss's face had gone a particular shade of gray. Colonel Carter, I want you to know that I had no... I'm not here to assign blame today, Daniel said. I'm here to make sure that transport lands safely when it does land. After that, there are people whose job it is to assign blame, and they will do it thoroughly. He picked up his notebook. I need an emergency maintenance team on the south runway within the hour. He got one. By early afternoon, the airport looked different. Not visually. The same gray fog. The same tired carpets in the terminal. The same coffee cart that always ran out of the good stuff by 9 a.m. But there were federal vehicles in the parking lot now. There were people in the operations center who hadn't been there that morning. There was a quality to the air, the kind that descends when something that was hidden is no longer hidden, and everyone knows it. Noah Bennett found Daniel standing near the window of a small conference room, looking out at the tarmac where the emergency team was working. "Sir," Noah said. "I wanted to." He stopped, started again. "Is there anything I should be doing?" Daniel turned from the window. "You've done it." "What?" "The right thing. At the gate this morning. That was it. That was the moment." He looked at the young officer. Everything that happened after that, the radio, the verification, the inspection, all of that was already in motion. But when you gave me her badge number, when you confirmed the clearance against what she was saying, you did the thing that holds this whole system together. Noah was quiet for a moment. "She's going to know it was me." "Yes." "That's going to be hard." "Yes," Daniel said. "It is. But here's the thing about hard things." He looked back out at the tarmac. "They're the ones that count." That evening, Daniel sat in his truck in the parking lot of Westbridge Regional Airport, waiting for his replacement to arrive, a full inspection team that would finish what he'd started and begin the process of properly recertifying the systems. He had his phone out, not to make calls, just to look at the photo he kept as his wallpaper. Lily, 8 years old in the photo, maybe 8.5, standing in a sunflower field somewhere in Ohio. They'd taken a road trip that summer, just the two of them, 3 weeks after the 1-year anniversary of Sarah's death. She was laughing at something off camera. She had Sarah's eyes and his stubbornness and her own laugh that belonged entirely to herself. He still had to pick her up from school in 3 hours. He texted her, "On my way home soon." "Tacos tonight." Her response came back in 40 seconds. "Yes, extra guacamole. Don't forget I said that." He smiled. His radio buzzed. General Hartwell's office again. The call was brief commendation documentation review, formal investigation authorization. All the right words, all the right procedures. Daniel listened, confirmed, signed off. When the call ended, he sat quietly for a moment. I thought about Rebecca Lawson, who was right now in a room somewhere in this building, talking to people she probably wished she didn't have to talk to. He didn't feel satisfaction about that. He never felt satisfaction when someone had to face consequences. He felt something more like weight, the weight of how many moments had stacked up between a person making small bad decisions and the moment when those decisions became something you couldn't walk back. She hadn't started her career by tearing up federal documents. She'd started it by letting small arrogances go unchecked, by believing little by little that her name mattered more than the rules, by looking at a man in a worn jacket and deciding in half a second that he couldn't be who he said he was. That half second cost her everything. And Daniel knew he'd seen it before more times than he wanted to count, that the half seconds are where everything important happens. Not in the ceremonies, not in the commendations, not in the moments when someone calls your radio and says your name in front of a crowd. In the half seconds, when you see a person, and you decide who they are before they've had a chance to tell you. He put the truck in drive. He had tacos to get to. The pieces of paper were still in his pocket when Daniel walked back through the terminal. 4 torn fragments of a federal authorization document folded together and placed precisely where the original had been. He hadn't thrown them away. He hadn't mentioned them again after the radio call. He just carried them the way he carried most things, quietly and with intention. Rebecca Lawson was still at the gate. That surprised him, actually. He'd half expected her to disappear into the back office the moment the operations director showed up. A lot of people did that when the ground started to shake. They looked for a door. But she was still standing there, arms crossed, jaw set, wearing the expression of someone who had not yet decided how to interpret what had just happened to them. Daniel almost respected that. Almost. Gerald Foss was walking 2 steps behind Daniel and 1 step to the left, which was the physical posture of a man trying to be present without being responsible. He kept clearing his throat softly like he was preparing to say something, and then deciding against it. Daniel stopped in front of Rebecca. She looked at him. He looked at her. There was a full second of silence, not an uncomfortable one, just a real one, the kind that happens when 2 people are both calculating. "I owe you an explanation," Daniel said. Rebecca blinked. That was not what she expected. Excuse me. Not an apology, he said quickly. An explanation. There's a difference. You made a decision based on what you saw. What you saw was incomplete. That's not entirely your fault. He paused. The part that is your fault is what you did with the document. Her jaw tightened. I was doing my job. Tearing up a federal authorization document is not your job, Officer Lawson. Verifying it is your job. Your scanner did that. Twice. Your judgment overrode your own system. I've seen fake documents before. I'm sure you have, Daniel said. So have I. That's not what that was, and somewhere in your professional experience you knew that. You made a different choice. He looked at her steadily. Why? Rebecca opened her mouth, closed it, looked away. Gerald Foss cleared his throat again. This time it was a real attempt to speak. Colonel Cart, if we could perhaps move this to... We're fine here, Director. Daniel kept his eyes on Rebecca. I'm asking you a real question, not a gotcha, not a setup. Why did you tear it? She looked back at him. Something shifted in her face, not softened exactly, but cracked. Just a hairline. Because you didn't look right, she said. I didn't look right, Daniel repeated. I've been at this gate for 11 years. I know what federal inspectors look like. They come in with badges on lanyards and government vehicles and somebody from operations to escort them. They don't drive in alone in a truck with a cracked mirror and just... She stopped. And just what? And just stand there like they have nowhere else to be. Daniel was quiet for a moment. And that made you angry? It made me suspicious. Both, Daniel said. It made you both. He reached into his pocket and took out the torn pieces of the authorization. He placed them on the security counter between them. You were right that I didn't look the way you expected. You were right that something felt off to you. That instinct, that professional instinct, that's worth something. It's actually the instinct that makes a good security officer. He looked at the pieces of paper. But then you skipped every step between the instinct and the action. You didn't verify. You didn't escalate. You didn't document. You just decided. And that gap between the instinct and the decision, that's where this went wrong. Rebecca stared at the torn pieces. I thought you were trying to game the system. I know. People try to game this gate, more than you'd think. I believe you. And your... She stopped again. Your radio. The military channel. If you were a federal inspector, why didn't you just identify yourself fully from the beginning? Why not say Colonel Carter up front? Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Because Colonel Carter is a title, and I've spent 23 years learning that titles don't actually tell you anything about a person. I wanted to come through this gate the same way anybody else would. I wanted the process to work the way it's supposed to work. Document presented, document verified, clearance granted. If the process had worked, we wouldn't be having this conversation. He picked the pieces up off the counter and put them back in his pocket. The process didn't work because you decided you were above it. Foss made a sound, a sharp intake of breath. Rebecca said nothing. Badge 2247, Daniel said quietly. I'll be noting this in my incident report. What happens after that is not up to me. He picked up his notebook. But what happens right now is up to you. You can help me, or you can make this harder. Your choice. Rebecca Lawson looked at him for a long, still moment. And then she said quietly, very quietly, What do you need? That was the moment Daniel Carter decided she wasn't beyond saving. He wasn't sure yet if the same was true about the airport. He was starting to have serious doubts. The maintenance supervisor's name was Tommy Garrett, and he met Daniel at the South Runway access point, looking like a man who hadn't slept well in about 3 months. He was maybe 50, with the kind of face that work builds lined and direct, not unfriendly, but careful. He shook Daniel's hand with a grip that meant something. Colonel Carter, I was told to give you full access. Appreciate it, Daniel said. How long have you been running maintenance here? Going on 8 years. Good. Then you know these systems better than anyone. Daniel started walking. Walk with me. Tommy walked with him, and Noah Bennett followed at a respectful distance, tablet in hand, pulling up records. The fog had thinned a little by now, and the runway stretched out ahead of them with that particular quality that large open spaces have a kind of indifferent patience. Like it didn't care what happened above it, as long as it was allowed to exist undisturbed. They reached the first relay junction, the same one Daniel had crouched at earlier, and he stopped. "Tell me about the last inspection on this section," Daniel said. Tommy looked at it, looked at Daniel. "Records show 8 months ago." "Do they?" A pause. "Sir, do the records show that because the inspection happened, or because someone wrote it down?" Tommy Garrett went very still. That kind of stillness has its own language. It's not the stillness of confusion. It's not the stillness of innocence. It's the stillness of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and just heard someone else name the exact shape of it. "Tommy," Daniel said, and his voice was different now, quieter, more direct. The way you talk to someone you need to reach, not confront. "I've been doing this for 11 years. I've walked a lot of runways. I know what a system looks like when it's been maintained, and I know what it looks like when the paperwork's been maintained instead. These bolts haven't been touched in at least a year, maybe more." He paused. "I'm not here to put you in a bad spot. I'm here because in 4 hours a transport carrying 48 people is supposed to use this runway, and I need to know the truth about what's actually working and what isn't." Tommy's jaw moved. He looked at the junction, looked at the bolts Daniel had noticed, looked at the service sticker. "If I tell you something," Tommy said slowly, "does it?" He stopped. "Does it stay with me?" Tommy nodded. "No," Daniel said. "I'm not going to make you that promise. But I will tell you this, there's a difference between the person who creates a problem and the person who knows about a problem and chooses to come forward. That difference matters, legally and otherwise." He met Tommy's eyes. "And right now I'm asking you to be the second person." Tommy Garrett looked down at the tarmac for a long moment. Then he looked back up. "It's been 14 months, he said. "At least." The number landed like a stone. "Walk me through it," Daniel said. Tommy did. He talked for 22 minutes without stopping. He talked about a budget review that happened 18 months ago when airport ownership changed hands and the new management came in with a spreadsheet and a mandate. He talked about inspections that were scheduled and then quietly removed from the calendar. He talked about a maintenance contract that was cut in half and a service company that was still being paid in full. He talked about paperwork that crossed his desk with signatures on it. His own signature sometimes on lines he didn't remember signing authorizing work orders for inspections he didn't know had happened. He talked about the moment he realized the signatures weren't always exactly his. "Forgery," Daniel said. Tommy closed his eyes. "I reported it internally, 3 months ago, went to my direct supervisor, wrote it up, documented it, put it through the proper internal channel. And my direct supervisor is Harrison Burke's brother-in-law." Daniel stopped walking. He turned to look at Tommy fully. "Say that again." "Harrison Burke, the executive you met this morning. His brother-in-law runs facility operations. When I filed the internal report, it went to him. He called me in, told me I'd misread the documents, showed me what he said were the originals, which didn't match what I'd seen, and told me to let it go." Tommy's voice was very level now, the way voices get when emotion has been held down for so long that it becomes structure instead of feeling. So I let it go. I told myself maybe I was wrong, maybe I'd misread it." He looked out at the runway. "But I knew I hadn't." "Why didn't you go further, federal reporting FAA?" "Because I've got 2 kids in college," Tommy said. "Because I've got a mortgage. Because every time I thought about picking up that phone, I thought about what happened to Mike Dreyer." "Who's Mike Dreyer?" "Guy who used to run safety compliance here. Good man. 15 years on the job. About 2 years ago he started asking questions about some of the contract work. Same kind of questions I was asking. 6 weeks later, his position was eliminated in a restructuring. He was offered a severance package with an NDA attached. He took it." Tommy shook his head slowly. "He has a daughter with a heart condition. He needed the insurance." The weight of it was settling into the air around them, not dramatically, not with any kind of movie score swell, just with the quiet accumulation of what it actually costs people to tell the truth in systems designed to make the truth expensive. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. How many people in this airport know what you just told me? Tommy thought about it. Maybe 6, maybe 8. People who've noticed things. People who've asked questions and been told they misread something. He paused. Nobody who went further than I did. Until today. Until today, Tommy confirmed. Daniel made several pages of notes. He photographed everything Tommy pointed to. He asked questions that were specific and technical, and got answers that were specific and technical. And through it all, he kept his voice steady and his pace deliberate, because the moment you let urgency bleed into your manner is the moment people start second-guessing whether they should have talked to you. When they finished the circuit, Daniel pulled out his phone and made a call. Not to General Hartwell's office, not to command. To a number he'd had in his contacts for 9 years labeled simply FAA whistleblower. The call lasted 6 minutes. When he hung up, Noah was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Is that? Noah started. Yes, Daniel said. Federal Aviation Administration, their Safety Investigation Unit. They have jurisdiction here independent of the Air Force. He put the phone in his pocket. They're sending a team. Noah processed that. How fast? They're already 3 hours away. They were already on their way. He saw Noah's expression shift. I flagged the possibility of documentation irregularities when I filed the pre-inspection report last week, based on some patterns I'd noticed in this airport's records going back 18 months. He glanced at Noah. I didn't know what I was going to find. I hoped I was wrong. You weren't. No, Daniel said. I wasn't. He found Rebecca Lawson 20 minutes later in the break room adjacent to the security station. She was sitting at a table with a cup of coffee. She wasn't drinking, staring at the surface of it with the expression of a person having a very honest conversation with herself. She looked up when he came in. She didn't look away, which he noticed. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Not because he owed her that consideration, but because standing over people when you're talking to them is a power move, and he'd never been interested in power moves. You need to know what we found on the tarmac, he said. She listened. She didn't interrupt, which surprised him. She sat with both hands around her coffee cup, and she listened to all of it. The falsified records, the forged signatures, Harrison Burke's brother-in-law, Mike Dreyer, and his daughter, and the NDA, the FAA team, 3 hours out. When he finished, she set the cup down. I didn't know, she said. I believe you, but I should have. She looked at him directly. That's what you're going to say next, isn't it? That the same pattern I used to override a clearance scanner is the same pattern that let all this happen. That if someone had actually been doing their job at this gate, I wasn't going to say that. Why not? It's true. Daniel looked at her. Because you already know it. And because saying true things to people who already know them isn't a conversation, it's punishment. And I'm not in the punishment business. He leaned forward slightly. But here's what I am going to say. You're still here. You didn't disappear into the back office. You answered the question about what you needed to do. That's something. Rebecca was quiet. What's going to happen to me? That depends on a lot of things that are above my pay grade. What I can tell you is that what you did this morning, the document, that's serious. You know that. I know. But who you are after this morning, that's a different calculation. He stood up. Right now, I need every piece of surveillance footage from this gate going back 18 months. And I need someone with security clearance to help me organize it. That person could be you, or I can find someone else. Rebecca Lawson stood up. She left her coffee on the table. Tell me what you need, she said. Harrison Burke found out the FAA was coming at 2:47 in the afternoon. Daniel knew the exact time because he was in the operations center when Burke's phone rang, and he watched Burke's face cross from confidence to calculation to something approaching panic in the span of about 4 seconds. It was a fast transition. People who were used to managing situations from the inside were always the quickest to understand when a situation had moved outside their management. Burke looked at Daniel. This is premature, he said. Whatever you think you found on that runway. Mr. Burke, Daniel said, the FAA team arrives at 6. They're bringing documentation specialists and a systems verification crew. They'll be working through the night. He picked up his notebook. I'd suggest using the next 3 hours to get ahead of this rather than behind it. I don't know what you think gives you the authority. Federal Aviation Safety Inspection Authorization, signed by the Secretary of Defense's office, Daniel said without heat. You're welcome to challenge it. The number to call is in the Federal Register. They're open until 5. Burke looked at him for a long, calculating moment. Then he picked up his phone and walked toward the hallway. Daniel turned to Gerald Foss, who had been standing by the window with the expression of a man watching a slow-motion collision from a distance that was somehow still too close. Director Foss, Daniel said, I need you to understand something. The transport that's supposed to land here tonight is carrying military personnel returning from a deployment. 48 people. Some of them haven't been home in 8 months. He let that sit for a moment. That transport is not landing here until these systems are certified. That could mean a diversion to another airport. It could mean a delay of 12 to 24 hours. For those 48 people that matters. So here's what I need from you, not from Burke, not from facilities, from you personally. I need full operational cooperation with everything the FAA team asks for tonight. Can you give me that? Foss straightened. Yes, Colonel. You have my word. Good. Daniel turned toward the door. Then let's go to work. The next 3 hours ran at a different speed. Daniel moved through the airport with a precision that was almost surgical, back to the tarmac, back to the records room, into the communications log, into the maintenance contracts, following each thread as it appeared and noting where it disappeared. Noah was with him the whole time, and the young officer had changed in some way that Daniel couldn't quite name. He was more certain in his movements, less apologetic in his questions, asking the right things without waiting to see if it was okay to ask them. At one point, while they were going through a stack of service contracts in a filing room that smelled of old paper and regret, Noah looked up from a folder and said, "This one has Burke's signature on it, and the date is..." He looked closer. "The date is 3 weeks after the service company filed for bankruptcy." Daniel stopped. "Read that back to me." Noah read it. Daniel held out his hand. Noah gave him the folder. He looked at it for a long moment, at the signature, the date, the service company name, the contract amount. Then he photographed it. Then he placed it in the separate pile he'd been building of items that needed immediate FAA attention. "You know what that means," Daniel said. "It means someone was paying a company that no longer existed," Noah said slowly. "Which means the money was going somewhere else. Which means the falsification wasn't just about cutting corners," Daniel said. "It was about moving money." Noah absorbed that. "So the maintenance wasn't just skipped because of budget cuts." "No," Daniel said. "The maintenance was skipped because skipping it was profitable, and the records were falsified to hide that it was skipped. And the people who tried to raise questions were removed before they could make those questions official." He looked at the folder again. "This isn't just negligence, Noah. This is a scheme." The silence in the filing room had a different quality after that. They kept going. Rebecca Lawson brought them a box of surveillance tapes at 4:15, organized by date going back 22 months, with a handwritten index on yellow legal paper. She'd done it herself. She handed it to Daniel without ceremony and said, "There are a few gaps. Cameras in the service corridor went offline for about a week each time there was a scheduled inspection. I checked the camera maintenance log. Those outages aren't logged." Daniel looked at the index, then at her. "How long did it take you to put this together?" "About an hour." "And you noticed the correlation between the camera outages and the inspection dates?" "I noticed patterns," she said, and there was a flatness to her voice that wasn't defeat. It was something more like reckoning the sound of a person holding themselves accountable in real time. "It's what I'm actually good at, when I let myself do it right." Daniel nodded. "This is good work." Rebecca started to turn away, then stopped. "My father was a cop," she said. Not loud, just matter of fact. 26 years. He used to say that the badge meant you were responsible for everyone who couldn't protect themselves. She was quiet for a moment. I forgot that somewhere along the way. I started thinking it meant I got to decide who was worth protecting. Daniel said nothing. Some things don't need a response. They just need to be heard. She walked away. He watched her go. Then he turned back to the box of tapes and kept working. The FAA team arrived at 6:08 p.m., 12 minutes behind their projected time in 2 vans and a cargo vehicle carrying equipment. The lead investigator was a woman named Patricia Morrow. Late 40s, silver-streaked hair pulled back tight, the kind of walk that meant she'd been doing this long enough to not need to announce herself. She shook Daniel's hand and got straight to it. What are we looking at? Systematic falsification of maintenance records, going back at least 14 months. Possibly 22, Daniel said. 41 documented discrepancies between official records and actual system condition. At least 1 forged signature on internal documentation. Financial irregularities on 2 service contracts, one with a company that was already bankrupt at the time of contract execution. Camera outages correlating with inspection dates. A previous safety compliance officer removed from his position after raising questions, and a non-disclosure agreement used to close that exit. He handed her the notebook. It's all in here. Patricia Morrow flipped through the notebook. How long did this take you to compile? Since about 8 this morning. She looked up at him. You found all of this in one day. I found what I could find in one day, he said. You'll find the rest. She looked at the notebook for another moment. The transport that was supposed to land here tonight has been diverted to Andrews, 48 personnel. They'll be home by morning. That's the right call. I know, Daniel said. They stood there for a moment. 2 people who'd spent their careers making sure the systems that everyone else took for granted actually worked, looking at each other across the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from doing that work well. You want to brief my team? Patricia asked. Yes, Daniel said. And then I have to go get my daughter from a friend's house. Patricia almost smiled. How old? 10. What did you promise her for dinner? Tacos, extra guacamole. Then brief my team fast, she said. He briefed the team in 22 minutes. He was thorough and he was fast, and he answered every question they had, and when he was done, he handed Patricia the surveillance box that Rebecca had compiled, and the folder with Burke's signature on the bankrupt company's contract, and the separate documentation pile he'd built through the afternoon. Patricia held up the folder. This one's going to sting somebody. Several somebodies, Daniel said. Are you available tomorrow? We'll need a statement. I'll come in at 8. I need to get Lily to school first. Patricia wrote his number in her notebook. Go get your tacos, Colonel. He found Noah Bennett by the security station on his way out. The young officer was standing at the scanner, not on duty, just standing there looking at the gate with an expression that was hard to read. You okay? Daniel asked. Noah thought about it, which was itself an honest answer. I don't know yet, he said. I keep thinking about this morning. About how I ran the scan the second time, even after it came back green the first time. About how I almost didn't say her name and badge number. But you did. It was close. It usually is, Daniel said. That's not a bug in the system. That's the system. The right thing is usually close, usually uncomfortable, usually costs you something. He looked at Noah. What did it cost you today? Noah was quiet for a moment. Probably some sleep, some comfort. A relationship with a senior officer that's going to be awkward for a while. And what did it get you? Noah looked at the gate. At the scanner that had showed green twice for a man that nobody looked twice at. The truth, he said. And maybe I don't know. The feeling that I did the thing I was actually here to do. Daniel nodded. That feeling, he said, is worth losing the sleep. He walked out to his truck. The parking lot was quiet in the early evening. The fog fully gone now, the sky a deep clear blue that airports always look better under than any other kind of sky. He started the engine. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel. I thought about Harrison Burke, who was probably on the phone with a lawyer right now trying to find the architecture of an explanation. He thought about Tommy Garrett, who had been carrying his secret for 3 months and would now have to carry it a different way, heavier in some respects, lighter in others. He thought about Mike Dreyer, who'd signed an NDA to protect his daughter's health insurance, and who would probably get a call from a federal investigator within the next week. He thought about Rebecca Lawson, and the look on her face when she said, "I forgot somewhere along the way." I thought about Sarah the way he always thought about Sarah, when a day had been heavy enough that something in him needed ballast. She'd been the one who told him to leave active command. Not because she was afraid for him, though she always was, but because she'd looked at him one evening at their kitchen table and said, "You're so good at keeping everybody else safe. When are you going to let yourself just be somewhere?" He'd argued with her. They'd had the argument 3 times over 2 years. And then she got sick, and the argument stopped mattering the way arguments stop mattering when something more important arrives, and he left anyway. Not because she'd won the argument, but because she'd been right, and he'd known it. And sometimes, it takes losing someone to let yourself believe what they were telling you. He'd settled in a small town, fixed aircraft equipment, raised Lily, and taken the federal inspection work because it let him still be useful in the way he knew how to be useful, without the weight of the uniform, without the ceremony, without any of the architecture of importance that he'd spent 18 years inside of and had never quite been comfortable in. The runway doesn't care about my title. He'd said that to Rebecca, and it was true, and it was also only half the truth. The whole truth was that the runway was the only place he'd ever felt like the title didn't matter. Like he could just be the man doing the work, and the work could speak for itself, and nobody needed to know anything else. He pulled out of the parking lot. 3 hours later. Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table, with a ring of guacamole on her upper lip that she was refusing to wipe off because she thought it was funny, and Daniel was watching her from across the table and thinking about nothing in particular. She looked up. "You look weird." "Thanks." "Like you're thinking about something but you don't want to think about it." "I'm thinking about you doing your homework," he said. "Dad." She gave him the look she'd inherited directly from Sarah, the one that meant she was not fooled, and she was not going to pretend to be fooled. "What happened today?" He looked at her, 10 years old with her mother's eyes and her own specific laugh doing homework on a Wednesday night with guacamole on her lip. "I went to work," he said, and some things that were hidden turned out to not be hidden anymore. She processed that with the seriousness that kids process things when they sense an adult is being real with them. "Is that good?" "Usually," Daniel said. "Yeah, usually that's good." She went back to her homework. He went back to watching her, and the torn pieces of a federal authorization document sat folded in his jacket pocket, which was hanging on the hook by the front door, which was where he always hung it when he got home, which meant they were 3 rooms away and almost forgotten, and more important than anyone in this kitchen was thinking about right now. Almost. Patricia Morrow's team worked through the night. Daniel knew this because Patricia sent him a text at 2:14 a.m. that said only, "Burke's office. You need to see what we found." And then another at 3:47 a.m. that said, "Make it 7, not 8. Bring coffee if you can." I was already awake when the second text came in. He'd been awake since around 1:30, lying in the dark, listening to the specific silence of a house where a child is sleeping safely, which is one of the few silences in the world that has genuine peace in it. He'd been running the threads through his mind, the way he always did, after a complex day, not anxiously, just methodically, the way you check a system before you close it down for the night. Making sure nothing important had been missed. Something was nagging at him. Had been nagging at him since the filing room since he'd found the contract with Burke's signature dated 3 weeks after the service company went under. It wasn't the forgery that bothered him exactly. It wasn't the money. It was the timing. He got up at 5:15, made coffee, stood in the kitchen and looked at his notebook which he'd left open on the table the night before. He read through his notes from the beginning, from the gate, from the tarmac, from Tommy Garrett's 22-minute account from the filing room, from the surveillance box Rebecca had compiled. And then he saw it. The camera outages that Rebecca had flagged, the ones that correlated with scheduled inspections, the ones not logged in the camera maintenance record. She'd noted them as happening during specific windows. He'd absorbed that as data and moved on. but now looking at it again at 5:15 in the morning with fresh eyes and a cup of coffee, he cross-referenced the dates with the service contract timeline. Every camera outage happened within 72 hours of a payment being processed to the bankrupt service company. Every single one. The cameras weren't going down because inspections were being hidden. The cameras were going down to hide the payments. He picked up his phone and called Patricia at 5:22 a.m. She answered on the second ring, which told him she hadn't slept. "You found something. Check the camera outage dates against the payment processing records," he said. Specifically, the wire transfers. A pause. He could hear movement papers, the sound of someone else in the room being redirected. Then Patricia said very quietly, "How did you not already tell me this? I just figured it out." Carter. Another pause. "This changes the charge structure." "I know," he said. "How much does it change it?" "From falsification of safety records," Patricia said slowly, "to systematic financial fraud using federal aviation infrastructure as cover." She paused again. "Wire fraud, conspiracy, potentially RICO if the network is wide enough." "How wide do you think it is?" "I think," Patricia said, "that Westbridge is not the only airport." The coffee in his hand had stopped feeling warm. He stood very still in his kitchen at 5:22 in the morning and let that sentence do what it needed to do. "How many?" "We found 2 other facilities in the same regional ownership group, same parent company as Westbridge. We're pulling their maintenance records now." A sound of papers. "If the pattern holds." "The pattern holds," Daniel said. It wasn't arrogance. It was the specific certainty that comes from having spent 23 years learning how systems fail. When a method works, people use it again. People who are comfortable in their corruption get comfortable in their methods. "Pull all 3 facilities, tonight." "Already done," Patricia said. "Be here at 7. Haimad a second cup of coffee, poured it into a thermos, and left a note on the kitchen table for Lily. "Went in early. Mrs. Hernandez will take you to school. Tacos again tonight if you want. Dad." He thought for a second, then added a small drawing of a taco in the corner, which was something he'd started doing when she was 6, because it made her laugh and she'd never asked him to stop. He was at the airport by 6:40. The operations center looked like it had been turned inside out. Patricia's team had pulled records from 3 filing rooms and 2 server rooms and arranged them across every available surface with the organized urgency of people who have found something real and are moving to secure it before anyone can make it not real. 2 team members were on laptops cross-referencing databases. A third was on the phone with someone who sounded federal and serious. Patricia met him at the door with the expression of someone who had been awake all night and was running on the particular fuel that comes from being right about something that matters. 3 airports, she said. Same parent company. Regional Holdings Group LLC, registered in Delaware, principal offices in Atlanta. Westbridge Fairmont Regional in Kentucky, and Blue Ridge Airport in Virginia. She handed him a folder. "The pattern is identical at all 3. Maintenance records falsified. Camera systems cycled offline during payment windows. Service contracts maintained with 2 companies, one of which, as you know, was bankrupt, and the second of which," she tapped the folder, "the second of which does not appear to exist." Daniel opened the folder. "What do you mean does not exist?" "The second service company, Apex Aviation Services LLC, has a registered address, a tax ID, and 3 years of contract payments from all 3 airports totaling." She paused for effect, and even at 6:45 in the morning after no sleep, she earned the pause. $4.3 million. He looked up from the folder. $4.3 million. Over 31 months. She crossed her arms. "The registered address is a UPS store in suburban Atlanta. The tax ID was filed once and never used for any other tax document. The company has no employees, no equipment, no history of any aviation work anywhere." "It's a shell," Daniel said. "It's a very well-constructed shell. Someone knew exactly how to build it, so it passed surface-level review. The contracts look legitimate. The invoices look legitimate. The authorization signatures look legitimate, except, as we now know, at least some of those signatures were forged." Daniel turned pages in the folder. His eyes moved fast, the way they moved when he was processing and organizing simultaneously. Who signed the contracts at the other facilities? That's where it gets interesting, Patricia said. She reached past him and turned to a specific page. At Fairmont, the senior facilities director. At Blue Ridge, the airport manager. At Westbridge. She pointed. Harrison Burke. Daniel looked at the name. He's not the only one. No. But he may be the hub. The contracts all originate from the same legal template, same language, same clause structure, same payment schedule format. Someone with access to all three facilities' systems drafted these. Burke has that access. He sits on the Regional Holdings Group Operational Board. Daniel set the folder down. Where is Burke right now? Patricia's expression shifted just slightly. That's the other thing I needed to tell you. Something cold moved through Daniel's chest. He ran. His car left the airport parking structure at 11:47 p.m. last night. His personal cell phone has been off since midnight. His home address, checked by local police at my request at 2 a.m., is empty. The room was very quiet for a moment. He knew we'd found the contract, Daniel said. He must have been watching, or someone told him. Patricia's jaw tightened. We have a bolo out. His passport was flagged at midnight. If he tries to leave the country. He already tried, Daniel said. He was thinking fast, running it through. If his phone went off at midnight, he wasn't planning to run last night. He was planning to run when this happened. The phone going off the car, leaving that, was the contingency plan. Something triggered it before he was ready. What would have triggered it? Daniel looked at the folder. At the contract with Burke's name on it. At the forged signatures. Someone told him we found the shell company, he said. Someone inside this building made a call. Patricia was already moving. I need the outgoing phone logs from every airport-issued device used last night. And the personal devices of anyone who was in the operations center between 8 p.m. and midnight, Daniel said. Patricia pointed at one of her team members across the room. Chen. Phone logs. All of them. Now. Chen, who had the focused energy of someone who had not considered sleep as an option, nodded and turned back to his laptop. Daniel looked at his notebook. He was adding to it in real time, his handwriting getting smaller and faster the way it always did when things were accelerating. He turned to Patricia. The transport that was diverted last night, Andrews Air Force Base. What's their timeline? They were told 12 to 24 hours for the diversion. We need the certification team on this runway this morning. Fast track. He met her eyes. Those 48 people need to get home. And I'm not letting this airport stay in shutdown longer than it has to because of what Burke did. The systems aren't safe yet. The systems haven't been touched yet. The team that was supposed to start at 7, get them here now. Run dual track. Investigate and repair simultaneously. He paused. That's what I'm authorizing. Patricia looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Dual track. Tommy Garrett arrived at 7:15 in the morning, looking like he'd slept maybe 2 hours and spent the rest of the night sitting with what he'd told Daniel the day before. He came into the operations center carefully, the way people enter rooms where they're not sure of their welcome. He looked at the tables covered in documents at Patricia's team, moving with purpose at Daniel standing near the window with his notebook. He walked straight to Daniel. Is it as bad as I think it is? He asked. It's 4.3 million and 3 airports, Daniel said. Tommy closed his eyes, just for a second, then opened them. I should have, Tommy. Daniel said it quietly but firmly. We talked about this yesterday. What you should have done is not the conversation we're having this morning. What you're going to do today is the conversation. Tommy looked at him. What am I going to do today? You're going to walk my maintenance team through every system on this runway and tell them exactly what's been done, what hasn't been done, and what you know versus what you were told. You're going to be as specific as you were with me yesterday. And then you're going to sit down with Agent Morrow and give a formal statement that covers everything you told me, plus anything else you remember that might help. Daniel held his gaze. Can you do that? Tommy breathed in, breathed out. Yeah, he said. I can do that. Good. Daniel turned toward the door. My team is on the south runway. I'll walk with you. They walked out into the morning together, a retired colonel in a worn canvas jacket and a maintenance supervisor who hadn't slept moving with shared purpose across a tarmac that was just beginning to catch the early sun. Noah Bennett was already out there. Daniel noticed him before Noah noticed Daniel. The young officer was talking to one of the maintenance technicians, pointing at the relay junction housing that Daniel had flagged the day before. I was explaining something using his hands, his tablet propped under his arm. The technician was listening and nodding. Daniel stopped walking for just a moment and watched. Noah saw him, raised a hand in acknowledgement. Daniel nodded back. Tommy noticed the exchange. That kid said your name and badge number, he said. When she was running you down at the gate, I heard about it. He did, Daniel said. Gutsy, Tommy said. Yes, Daniel said. It was. They kept walking. The maintenance team worked fast. Daniel moved with them, checking their work, asking questions, making notes. Tommy stayed close, answering technical questions with a specificity that came from 8 years of knowing these systems in his hands as well as in his head. The emergency lighting relay last genuinely serviced by Tommy's recollection 14 months ago. The foam suppression infrastructure, the pressure housing had a hairline fault that he'd flagged internally 11 months ago and never seen addressed. The backup runway sequencing running on hardware that was 3 years past recommended replacement cycle. Each one was documented. Each one was addressed. The maintenance team was good. Patricia had made sure of that when she called in the dual-track authorization, and the team that showed up was experienced and quick. By 9:30 a.m., 6 of the 41 flagged systems were cleared. By 11, it was 19. At 11:23 a.m., Patricia came out to the tarmac with her phone in her hand and found Daniel crouched next to a junction housing with a flashlight. They found Burke, she said. Daniel stood up. Charlotte Douglas International. He was trying to board a flight to London. Passport flag caught him at the gate. She paused. He had a carry-on bag with $80,000 in it and a second passport under a different name. The flashlight in Daniel's hand clicked off. Second passport. The name on it is Marcus Webb. We're running it now. Patricia's expression was controlled, but had an edge of something underneath. Not satisfaction, exactly more like the recognition of a pattern completing. He didn't run because we found the shell company. He had this ready. The passport, the cash, the flight. This was always the exit plan. Daniel absorbed that. Which means he always knew this day might come. Which means he knew what he was doing was serious enough to need an exit plan, Patricia said, which we'll be using in the charging documents. The other 2 airports, Fairmont and Blue Ridge, their management. Both have been contacted by local agents. Fairmont's director is cooperating. Blue Ridge. Patricia paused. The manager at Blue Ridge called their attorney before they called us back. So they knew too. They knew something, Patricia said. How much is what we're going to find out? Daniel looked back at the tarmac. At the maintenance team working their way down the runway. At Tommy Garrett pointing at a housing bracket and explaining something to a technician with the focus of a man who has decided that explaining things correctly is the most useful thing he can do right now. How long until this runway is certified? He asked. Your team's estimate is mid-afternoon, around 3. He checked his watch. 11:31 a.m. Then the transport can land tonight. If everything checks out. It'll check out, Daniel said. He clicked the flashlight back on and crouched back down. I'm going to make sure of it. At noon, Rebecca Lawson appeared on the tarmac. She wasn't in her security uniform. She was in civilian clothes, jeans, a dark jacket, her hair down. She looked like someone who had come to a place for a specific reason and wasn't sure of their welcome, but had decided to come anyway. Daniel saw her from about 30 yards away. He finished what he was doing, made his note, handed the flashlight to the technician beside him, and walked over. You're off duty, he said. I asked them to take me off the schedule today. She looked out at the runway, at the maintenance team, at the work happening that she hadn't known needed to happen until yesterday. I wanted to see it. See what it looks like when someone actually fixes something. She turned to him. Agent Morrow told me about Burke, about the shell company, about the other airports. Okay, Daniel said. I didn't know, she said again. And then immediately, but I want to stop saying that because it's starting to feel like an excuse, and it isn't really. Because I should have known. Not the details, I couldn't have known the details. But something was wrong here. People like Tommy Garrett don't just look tired for no reason. People don't get tight in the face when you ask normal questions for no reason. She looked at him. I knew something was wrong. I chose not to look at it because looking at it was complicated, and I already had enough complicated. Daniel listened. And then yesterday morning, I had a man in front of me who was trying to do the right thing, and I tore up his paperwork, she said. Because he didn't look the way I expected. Because I was more interested in being right than in being accurate. She paused. Those are not the same thing. No, Daniel said. They're not. I've been right a lot in my career, Rebecca said. And I think I confused that with never being wrong. She looked down at the tarmac. I was wrong yesterday. About you. And I've been wrong for a longer time about what this gate actually means. What it's actually for. Daniel was quiet for a moment. What made you come out here today? He asked. She looked at the maintenance team. At Tommy. At Noah, who was now helping a technician with a relay cover using a torque wrench with more confidence than he probably felt. Because I wanted to see what it looks like when people do the job right, she said. So I remember what I'm supposed to be doing. 47 p.m. Patricia Morrow called Daniel away from the tarmac and into a small conference room in the operations building. Two other people were in the room that Daniel didn't recognize: a man in a dark suit who introduced himself as Special Agent James Calloway from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and a woman in a gray blazer who said her name was Karen Wells and gave him a card that identified her as Assistant United States Attorney. Daniel looked at the card, then at Patricia. That was fast. Wire fraud crosses the federal threshold quickly, Karen Wells said, and $4.3 million moves things up the priority list. She had the precise, neutral manner of someone who had spent a long time making sure her manner didn't give anything away ahead of schedule. Colonel Carter, I want to thank you for what you documented yesterday. The quality and detail of your notes have been... She paused, choosing the word carefully, unusually useful. I've had practice, Daniel said, so I understand. She opened a folder. We're moving forward with federal charges against Harrison Burke, who is now in federal custody in Charlotte. We're also preparing charges against the manager of Blue Ridge Airport and the regional director of financial operations for Regional Holdings Group. She looked up. We believe there are two additional individuals, one of whom is employed at this airport, who had direct knowledge of the scheme and may face obstruction charges. Daniel thought about the phone call, the one that had tipped Burke and sent him running at midnight. You found who made the call? We did, Calloway said. It was a member of the facility's management staff. He called Burke at 11:31 last night from his personal cell phone. We have the record and the content of the call. The content, Daniel said. You have the content. He left a voicemail, Calloway said, and there was a flatness to his voice that was almost but not quite humor. He didn't realize voicemails are preserved. Daniel absorbed that for a moment. Is Tommy Garrett one of the two individuals? No, Wells said. Mr. Garrett filed an internal report 3 months ago that was subsequently suppressed. He's a witness, not a subject. She paused. You spoke with him yesterday. I did. His account corroborates the documentary evidence at every point. He's going to be an important voice in this. She closed the folder. I want to ask you something, Colonel. Off the record, just for my own understanding. When you walked into this airport yesterday morning, did you have any expectation of finding what you found? Daniel thought about that honestly. I had a professional expectation that the records were irregular. I'd been tracking some patterns in regional airport maintenance data for about a year. Westbridge kept appearing in those patterns. I requested this assignment specifically. Wells raised an eyebrow. So this inspection was not routine. All my inspections are routine, Daniel said. What I find varies. She looked at him for a moment. Fair enough. She stood up. We'll need your formal statement at your earliest convenience. Patricia has your contact information. I'll be here until the transport lands, Daniel said. Statement this afternoon if you want it. I want it, Wells said. She shook his hand. Thank you, Colonel. After they left, Patricia stayed. She sat down across from Daniel and looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has been working alongside a person for a day and a half and has formed opinions. You've been tracking this for a year, she said. Regional maintenance irregularities, yes. And you targeted this airport. I requested the assignment, Daniel said. Why Westbridge specifically? He opened his notebook. Turned to a page near the back which he'd written before he ever set foot in Westbridge Regional Airport. He slid it across the table to her. She looked at it. It was a list of 9 airports, all in the same regional ownership group, ranked by the severity of the irregularities Daniel had found in their public maintenance disclosures. Westbridge was first on the list with notes that dated back 11 months. You knew about Regional Holdings Group before yesterday, Patricia said. I suspected, Daniel said. Knowing requires walking the tarmac. Patricia looked at the list. At the 9 airports. The other 8 on this list are going to need visits, Daniel said. She looked up at him. I was going to request those assignments after this one confirmed the pattern, he said. I'd say the pattern is confirmed. Patricia set the notebook down. Carter. She chose her words carefully. In 11 years of FAA investigation, I have met federal inspectors who walk runways and inspectors who file reports. I have met very few who do both simultaneously while correctly predicting the shape of a criminal enterprise from public maintenance data. She paused. What you built here in one day with a paper notebook and a mechanical pencil is going to be the foundation of a federal case that probably touches 9 airports and 1 corporate fraud scheme. Daniel reached across the table and took his notebook back. The runway has 41 discrepancies, he said. 19 are cleared, 22 to go, and the transport needs to land tonight. He stood up. Was there anything else? Patricia smiled, not wide, just real. No, she said. That's everything. He was back on the tarmac by 3:20. Noah was still there. He'd been there most of the day, moving between the maintenance team and the records documentation work that Patricia's team needed help organizing. He was running on something not caffeine exactly, more like the specific energy of a person who has found that the thing they're doing matters, and that discovery is still fresh enough to feel like fuel. He fell into step beside Daniel as he made his way back to the south runway. Can I ask you something? Noah said. Go ahead. Why did you work so hard yesterday to protect me? He said it directly, which Daniel respected. You didn't have to do that. You didn't know me. I almost didn't say her name. Daniel walked for a few seconds before he answered. Do you know what a system is? He asked. Noah blinked at the shift. I mean in general, or in general, Daniel said. A system is a set of parts that work together to produce a result. The parts only work if they do what they're designed to do. The moment one part decides it's above its function, the system starts to fail. He gestured at the runway around them. This airport is a system. The security gate is a part. The maintenance records are a part. The inspection process is a part. Every person working here is a part. He looked at Noah. You did what the system needed you to do. You verified the clearance. You confirmed the reading. You provided the information that was requested. You were the part that worked. He paused. In a day where a lot of parts failed, you were the one that didn't. That's worth protecting. Noah walked in silence for a moment. I almost didn't. I know, Daniel said. But almost doesn't count in systems. Either the relay fires or it doesn't. He glanced at the young officer. You fired. They reached the south runway junction, where the last cluster of flagged systems was being addressed. The lead technician, a woman named Reeves, who'd been on the dual-track team since morning, looked up when Daniel approached. 7 left, she said. We're on track for 4:30 certification. Good, Daniel said. What's the hardest one left? Foam suppression pressure housing, she said. The fault Tommy flagged. We've got a replacement housing incoming parts run left 20 minutes ago. Should be here by 4. And if it's not, Reeves met his eyes. It'll be here, sir. It was there at 3:52. Daniel watched them install it. He watched with the full attention of someone for whom watching this kind of work was not background noise, but the point. The actual point. The reason all of the documents and the investigations and the federal charges and the conference rooms and the long nights existed. So that the physical systems worked. So that the relay fired. So that the foam suppression engaged if it needed to. So that 48 people descended out of the sky and touched ground and walked away to the people who were waiting for them. At 4:44 p.m. Reeves walked over to him with her certification tablet. All 41 systems cleared and verified, she said. South runway is operational. She held out the tablet. Your authorization. Daniel took the tablet and looked at the screen for a moment. The list of systems. The verification timestamps. The test results, everyone green. He thought about what these numbers had looked like yesterday morning when they existed only as fabricated entries in a false record. He thought about Tommy Garrett carrying the weight of that falsification for 3 months. He thought about Mike Dreyer signing an NDA to protect his daughter's health insurance. He authorized the certification. Then he picked up his radio. Air Force Command, this is Eagle Actual. Westbridge Regional Airport South Runway is certified and operational. The transport is clear to proceed. Over. A pause. 3 seconds. 4. Copy Eagle Actual. Transport is en route. ETA 2200 hours. Welcome back, Colonel. Good work. Over. Daniel clipped the radio to his belt. Reeves was watching him with an expression that was respectful, without being ceremonial. 2200, she said. That's 10 o'clock. Yes, Daniel said. You going to stay and watch it land? He thought about Lily. About the note on the kitchen table. About tacos 2 nights running, and whether she'd eaten with Mrs. Hernandez or waited for him. He looked at the runway one more time, clean and certified and ready. The work done right, the system working the way it was designed to work. No, he said. I've got somewhere to be. He was almost to his truck when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something in his professional instincts, finely tuned by 23 years of always answering unknown numbers, because you never knew which one mattered, made him pick up. Carter, he said. A pause. And then a voice he hadn't expected. Quiet. Careful. A little rough, like someone who hadn't spoken much today. Colonel Carter. My name is Mike Dreyer. I used to work safety compliance at Westbridge Regional. A pause. Someone from the FAA gave me your number. They said you might be able to help me. Daniel stopped walking. Mr. Dreyer, he said. I've been hoping someone would give you my number. The evening settled around the airport slowly. The kind of slow that happens after a day that has moved very fast. Daniel sat in his truck in the parking lot for 40 minutes, talking to Mike Dreyer. He listened more than he talked. He took notes in his small, precise hand, even though his notebook was propped on the steering wheel and the light was fading. He asked questions that were careful and specific, and gave Mike Dreyer the space to answer them at whatever pace he needed. Mike Dreyer talked about the questions he'd asked 2 years ago, about the answers he'd been given that didn't add up, about the restructuring that came 6 weeks later, and the severance offer, and the NDA, and the attorney who'd looked at him across a conference table and said, "This is a good offer, Mike. Your daughter's coverage transfers immediately with this package." He talked about signing it while knowing what he was signing away wasn't just his job. "I've thought about that document every day since," Mike said. "Wondered if I should have—" He stopped. "My daughter is doing well. The surgery went okay. She's 12 now." "I'm glad," Daniel said, and meant it fully. "What happens to the NDA?" Mike asked. "With all of this, the federal investigation does it still." "I'm not an attorney," Daniel said. "But Karen Wells is. She's the assistant U.S. attorney on this case." He found Wells's card in his pocket, read Mike the number. "Call her tomorrow morning. What you know and what you witnessed is material to a federal case. NDAs have limits when federal crimes are involved." He paused. "She'll explain it better than I can. But call her." "And you think she'll—" "I think you reported something internally and were removed from your position for doing it, and then pressured into silence." Daniel said. "I think the federal government is going to be very interested in hearing what you have to say." He paused again. "I think your daughter is 12 years old and doing well, and you did what you needed to do to make sure of that. Nobody is going to hold that against you, Mike." Mike Dreyer was quiet for a moment on the other end of the phone. "Thank you," he said. "Call Wells," Daniel said. "Tomorrow morning." He hung up, sat in the dark parking lot for a moment, added a final entry to his notebook, then put it in the glove compartment, started the truck, and pulled out. He called Lily from the road. She answered immediately. "You're late." "I know, I'm sorry. Mrs. Hernandez made me eat a salad." "That's good for you." "Dad." The look transmitted entirely through her voice. "It had no cheese on it." "Criminal," he agreed. "I'm 20 minutes out. What do you want?" "Tacos," she said, as if this were obvious, as if it had always been tacos, as if tacos were the fixed point around which the rest of the world arranged itself. "Extra guacamole," he said. "You remembered," she said, and the warmth in her voice was the kind that could reach through a phone and make a man who had just spent 36 hours dismantling a federal fraud scheme feel like he was already home. I was on the highway when his radio buzzed one final time. Not Command. Not Patricia. A short tone and then a voice he recognized as belonging to someone in General Hartwell's office. Professional, precise, and carrying a weight of formality that meant something was being made official. "Eagle Actual, this is General Hartwell's office. Message for Colonel Daniel Carter. The General sends his regards and requests to convey," a brief pause like someone reading from a text, "that the work completed at Westbridge Regional today represents exactly the standard this office expects and the standard this country depends on." The General's words, "Sir, not mine." Another pause. "Safe travels, Colonel." Daniel reached for the radio, pressed transmit. "Copy that. Tell the General I'll send my full report by Friday." He paused for just a second. "And tell him I'm going to get tacos." He released the button before whoever was on the other end could formulate a response to that. The highway was open, and the night was clear, and 48 people were somewhere in the air above him, heading home after 8 months away. And he was 20 minutes from his daughter and tacos, and the notebook in his glove compartment had 41 systems cleared and 22 pages of notes that were going to become part of a federal case that reached across 9 airports and one very carefully constructed lie. And in his inside breast pocket, where the authorization document used to be, were 4 torn pieces of paper. Still there, still evidence, still the moment when someone had decided he wasn't worth believing and had been wrong in every way a person can be wrong about another person. He drove. The tacos were from a place called Rosario's, which was 12 minutes from their house and had been Lily's favorite since she was 7 years old, and had declared with the authority only a 7-year-old can muster that their guacamole was the best thing that has ever existed in the history of food. Daniel had not argued with that assessment. He still didn't. He brought them home at 8:22 p.m. in 2 paper bags that were already going soft at the bottom from the heat, and Lily met him at the door in her pajamas, with her hair in a braid that had been neater 6 hours ago, and the expression of someone who had been patient for exactly as long as patience was reasonable, and not 1 second more. "You were supposed to be home at 6, she said. "I know. Mrs. Hernandez made me eat a salad with no cheese. You mentioned. And then she made me do my math homework before I could watch anything." "Mrs. Hernandez is a hero," Daniel said, handing her one of the bags. Lily took the bag and opened it and looked inside, and her entire expression reorganized itself around the presence of adequate guacamole. "Okay," she said. "She's a little bit of a hero." They ate at the kitchen table with the television off, which was a rule Daniel had instituted when Lily was 5. And which she'd complained about until she was about 8, and then quietly stopped complaining about, though she would never admit that. He'd noticed. He hadn't said anything. Some victories were better left uncelebrated. She told him about her day. A test in history that she thought she'd done well on. A disagreement with her friend Maya that had resolved itself by lunch. A book she'd started in English class that she already liked more than she expected to. She talked the way she always talked, in a continuous, slightly non-linear stream that required him to hold multiple threads simultaneously and ask the right questions to get the full picture. He was good at it. It was not entirely different from reading a maintenance record. She paused mid-sentence and looked at him. "You're doing the thing," she said. "What thing?" "The thing where you're listening, but you're also somewhere else." Daniel set down his taco. "Sorry." "What happened today?" He looked at her for a moment. She was 10 years old. She was also in the way that children of people who have been through real things sometimes are more capable of holding difficult information than most adults gave her credit for. "Do you know why I do the job I do?" he asked. She tilted her head. "You check airports." "I check the systems that keep planes safe," he said. "The lights that guide the runway. The equipment that stops a fire if something goes wrong. The things that nobody sees until they stop working." He paused. "Today I found out that someone had been pretending those things were working when they weren't, for a long time, and hiding it so nobody would find out." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Did you fix it?" "We started fixing it," he said. "Yes." "Are the planes safe now? The ones using that runway?" "Yes, as of this afternoon." She nodded, absorbed that, picked up her taco. "Good," she said with the clean finality of someone who has received a satisfactory answer and is ready to move on. "Can I tell you more about Maya?" "Please," Daniel said. He lay awake again that night, but differently than the night before. The previous night had been the methodical review of a system running threads, checking junctions, finding the thing that nagged. Tonight was something else. It was quieter and less productive and more honest. The way nights get after the work is done, and the only thing left is what the work meant. He thought about Burke in a federal holding facility in Charlotte, with $80,000 in a carry-on bag and a second passport that hadn't worked. He thought about the specific kind of person who builds an exit plan that elaborate, who has a fake name and a cash reserve and a flight to London in his back pocket, while he's sitting in operations meetings and signing service contracts and smiling at airport employees who have no idea. The planning required for that, the sustained performance of it, the daily decision to look people in the eye and continue. He'd met people like that before. Not many. Enough to know that the thing that allowed it wasn't an absence of conscience, but a very particular way of organizing one. A way that placed certain things inside the circle of what mattered, and certain things outside it, and was comfortable with where the lines were drawn. Burke had drawn the lines around himself and his money. Everything outside those lines, the passengers, the maintenance workers, the systems, the 48 people on the diverted transport, existed in a space where they were real enough to be useful and abstract enough to be ignored when they became inconvenient. Daniel had spent his career learning to understand that kind of thinking. Not to excuse it, to recognize it. Because the moment you stopped being able to recognize it was the moment it could happen somewhere on your watch without you seeing it coming. He fell asleep somewhere after midnight. His phone rang at 6:03 a.m. It was Patricia. "Good morning," she said in the tone of someone for whom morning was a time zone, not a greeting. "What happened?" Daniel said, not a question. "Mike Dreyer called Karen Wells last night," Patricia said. "At 11 p.m. She took the call." Daniel sat up. "What did he have?" "More than we expected." A pause that had weight in it. "Dreyer kept records, Daniel. After he was pushed out, after he signed the NDA, he kept personal copies of everything he'd flagged internally. 2 years of documentation. Photographs, emails, maintenance logs, a recorded conversation." Daniel stopped moving. He recorded a conversation with the facilities director at Westbridge, the brother-in-law, 11 months ago after his internal report was buried. He called the director and recorded the call on his personal phone. Patricia's voice was very precise now. The director tells him on tape that the inspection records are accurate and that Dreyer's concerns are based on a misunderstanding. And then, and this is the part he says, and I'm reading directly from the transcript here, he says, "Mike, you have a daughter who needs her coverage. You understand that, right? You understand what we're offering you is a very generous package for someone who is choosing to make things difficult." The room was very still. "That's a threat," Daniel said. "On tape," Patricia said. "Explicit and on tape, which elevates the charge against the facilities director from obstruction to extortion." She paused. "And it means the NDA Dreyer signed was obtained under duress, which makes it legally unenforceable, which means Dreyer can testify fully and openly with no exposure. Daniel exhaled slowly. How is he, Dreyer? Patricia considered the question. He sounded like someone who'd been holding something very heavy for 2 years and just put it down. She paused. Wells said he cried a little on the phone. She said she wasn't going to put that in any official document, but she wanted you to know. Daniel nodded, though nobody could see him. The facilities director, he's been notified. Federal agents are at his house right now, Patricia said. As of about 40 minutes ago. I was at the airport by 7:30. The operations center had a different quality to it than the previous 2 days. The frantic energy of discovery had settled into the purposeful rhythm of process. Patricia's team, organizing evidence. Wells's office coordinating with the FBI, the maintenance team filing their certification reports. The crisis had not passed exactly, but it had shifted from emergency into consequence, which was a different kind of work. Daniel went directly to the conference room, where Wells had set up her temporary office. She looked up when he came in. Colonel Carter, I was going to call you at 8. Patricia beat you to it, he said. He sat down across from her. How does Dreyer's recording change the charge structure? Significantly. Wells folded her hands on the table. We now have evidence of a coordinated scheme to suppress internal safety reporting through financial coercion. That changes our approach to the corporate structure. She opened a folder. Regional Holdings Group has a parent company. It's a private equity firm based in Atlanta, Meridian Capital Partners. They own the 3 airports we already identified, plus controlling interests in 4 more facilities in adjacent states. Daniel looked at her. 7 airports. 7 airports, Wells confirmed. And based on the financial trail we've been building from Westbridge's records, the shell company, the wire transfers, the payment timing. We believe the scheme originated at the Meridian Capital level, not at the individual airport level. She paused. Which means Burke and the airport managers were implementing a policy, not inventing one. Someone above Burke designed this, Daniel said. Someone above Burke designed this, yes. And that someone is currently our primary investigative focus. She looked at him steadily. Does the name Gerald Pritchard mean anything to you? Daniel thought. No. He's the managing partner of Meridian Capital, 62 years old, 23 years in private equity aviation investment. Clean public record, no regulatory issues, no prior investigations, significant philanthropic presence. She paused. He was also Harrison Burke's college roommate. There it was, the thread behind the thread. How long has Pritchard been building this? Daniel asked. We're estimating the scheme began at Fairmont Regional, which was the first airport in the Meridian portfolio, approximately 4 years ago. Westbridge came into the portfolio 2 years later. Blue Ridge 18 months after that. Wells looked at her notes. 4 years, 7 airports, and at this point we estimate the total diverted funds at somewhere between $12 and $18 million. The number sat in the room. Daniel looked at his notebook. He turned to the page where he'd listed the 9 airports from his pre-inspection research. 7 of them were in the Meridian Capital portfolio. He'd known about the regional ownership group. He hadn't known about Meridian being the thread connecting them. He slid the notebook across to Wells. I have 2 airports on this list that are not in the Meridian portfolio, he said. If the pattern at those 2 matches what we found here, Wells looked at the list. At the 2 airports Daniel had circled in the margin. Then the scheme may extend beyond Meridian, she said. Or Meridian is investing through a different holding structure, Daniel said. Shell companies within shell companies. Wells looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who is recalibrating their estimate of another person. You've done this before, she said. Not just runway inspections. I spent 3 years doing financial compliance reviews for Air Force contract work, Daniel said, before the inspection roll. He took the notebook back. The methods are the same. Follow the money until it stops moving, then ask why. At 9:15 a.m., Noah Bennett knocked on the conference room door. Wells looked up. Daniel waved him in. Noah came in with his tablet and an expression that was divided between urgency and the specific uncertainty of someone who isn't sure if what they've found is as significant as they think, or if they're about to look foolish in front of people they respect. I was helping Agent Chen organize the camera footage from the surveillance box that Officer Lawson compiled, Noah said. He set the tablet on the table. And I found something. He pulled up the footage. A timestamp in the corner 14 months ago. A camera angle covering the service corridor adjacent to the maintenance records room. This is during the window of one of the logged camera outages, Noah said. The official record says this camera was offline for 6 days, but the footage exists. The camera never actually went offline. The outage was logged, but the recording continued. Daniel and Wells both leaned forward. Someone logged a camera outage that didn't happen, Daniel said slowly. Yes, sir. Which means either they didn't know the camera was still recording, or they thought the recording had been deleted, and it wasn't. Noah scrolled to a specific timestamp within the footage. At 11:47 p.m. on this date 14 months ago, 2 people enter this corridor. He pressed play. The footage was grainy service corridor cameras, always were, but clear enough. 2 figures. One of them Daniel recognized immediately from his brief interactions in the operations center. Harrison Burke. The other was a man he didn't recognize, taller, older, in a dark coat. They were carrying file folders. They went into the maintenance records room. They were inside for 19 minutes. When they came out, the file folders looked different, thinner. Some folders replaced with others. They switched the records, Daniel said. Yes, sir, Noah said. That's 14 months ago, which means the falsification began earlier than Tommy Garrett estimated, Daniel said. And Burke had help. He looked at Wells. The other man. Wells was already on her phone. She pulled up something, turned the screen toward Daniel. We ran facial recognition on the footage 30 minutes ago. She paused. The second man is Gerald Pritchard. The room went completely silent. Noah looked between Daniel and Wells. He understood what that name meant by the quality of the silence. He was here, Noah said quietly. In person. How was here in person? Wells said. Which means this wasn't directed remotely. Pritchard came to Westbridge himself to make sure the record switch happened correctly. She set her phone down. That is the single most important piece of evidence we have in this case. That footage puts the managing partner of Meridian Capital Partners physically inside the airport records room at the time of the falsification. She looked at Noah. Mr. Bennett, how did you find this? Noah shifted his weight slightly. I was checking timestamps on the logged outages against the actual footage metadata. The metadata showed recording continuation, even when the official log showed an outage. It's a pretty small technical detail. Most people would have just taken the log at face value. Most people did take the log at face value for 14 months, Wells said. You didn't. Noah didn't know what to do with that, so he did nothing, which was the right thing. Daniel looked at him. Good catch, he said. Noah nodded, looked at the tablet, looked back up. There's more, he said. Same camera, different dates. 3 other instances of the same 2 men in the same corridor, over the course of 8 months. Wells was already calling someone. I need an evidence preservation order on all surveillance footage from Westbridge Regional Airport going back 4 years. She listened. Yes, all of it. She listened again. Then tell them it's in connection with a federal fraud investigation, and that the footage constitutes primary evidence in a RICO case, and see what they say after that. She hung up. Looked at Daniel. RICO, she said. Yeah, Daniel said. I heard you say that yesterday too. Yesterday I was speculating, she said. Today I'm not. The next 2 hours moved fast. Daniel gave his formal statement to Wells and Calloway, with Noah present as a witness. He was thorough and sequential and did not editorialize, which was the discipline of a man who had given formal statements before and knew that the facts presented in order were more powerful than any commentary. He covered the gate incident, the inspection findings, the filing room discovery, the conversation with Tommy Garrett, the cross-referencing of the camera outages against payment timing, and his pre-existing research into the regional maintenance irregularities. The statement ran to 41 pages. When he finished, Calloway looked at the pages and said, "You dictated that in an hour and 40 minutes." "I had good notes," Daniel said. At 11:50 a.m., Gerald Foss knocked on the conference room door with an expression that Daniel had not yet seen on him. Not the sweating gray of a man caught near something bad, but something more direct, more resolved. "Colonel Carter," Foss said. "Can I speak with you privately?" Daniel looked at Wells. She nodded. He stepped out into the hallway with Foss. The operations director was fidgeting with his ID lanyard, which was a nervous habit Daniel had clocked the first day, but his eyes were steadier than they'd been. "I want to tell you something," Foss said, "before it comes out another way." Daniel waited. "Burke tried to loop me in," Foss said. "About 18 months ago. He brought me to a meeting I thought it was a routine operations review, and he laid out the arrangement. The shell company, the payment structure. He made it sound—" Foss stopped. "He made it sound like a cost efficiency measure, like a normal financial arrangement that was just being handled creatively." He looked at Daniel. "I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. I said I needed to think about it, and then I never brought it up again, and neither did he." Daniel looked at him for a long moment. "Did you sign anything?" "No." "Did you transfer any funds?" "No." "Did you authorize any of the service contracts?" "No." Foss paused. "But I knew something was off, and I chose not to look at it." He met Daniel's eyes directly. "The same thing Officer Lawson said she did. I chose not to look at it because looking at it was complicated, and I had enough complicated." He breathed out. "I need to tell Wells." "Yes," Daniel said. "You do." Willett Foss stopped, started again. "What happens to me?" "I'm not an attorney," Daniel said, "but I know the difference between a person who participated and a person who didn't stop something. Those are legally different positions." He paused. "And I know that a person who came forward voluntarily and fully is in a very different position from a person who had to be found." Foss nodded slowly. "I should have come forward 2 days ago, when you first got here. You should have come forward 18 months ago," Daniel said, not unkindly. "But 2 days ago would have been better than today, and today is better than tomorrow." He held the conference room door open. "Wells is inside." Foss walked in. Daniel stood in the hallway for a moment. He thought about the specific gravity of that kind of confession. The one where a person decides that the weight of what they know has finally exceeded the weight of the fear of telling it. It never came easy. It never came clean. It always came with damage attached to the person confessing and to the people connected to them. But it came, and that mattered. At 1:15 p.m. his radio buzzed. Not command, not Hartwell's office. A direct channel that he hadn't used in 8 months, and the voice on it made him stop walking in the middle of the operations corridor. "Eagle Actual, this is Colonel Renata Voss, JAG Corps. I'm calling at the request of General Hartwell's office. Do you have a minute? Renata Voss, Judge Advocate General, the military's legal corps." Daniel knew the name. He'd worked alongside JAG on one previous investigation 3 years ago, a procurement fraud case at an air base in Texas that had resulted in 4 court-martials. "I have a minute," he said. "General Hartwell wants JAG involved in the Westbridge case," Voss said, "specifically regarding the diversion of the transport and the conditions that necessitated it. If the runway systems were as compromised as your inspection report indicates, and military personnel were scheduled to land on those systems, that potentially rises to a level of negligence with military implications." She paused. "We're looking at whether charges can be brought under federal statute with military jurisdiction attached." "That's Wells's call," Daniel said. "Wells agrees," Voss said. "She called us this morning. I'm telling you because you're the primary inspector of record, and I need to know. In your professional judgment, was that runway a danger to the transport that was diverted?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes, with the foam suppression system at the condition I found it in a landing incident on that runway, even a minor one could have escalated to a catastrophic outcome." Define catastrophic. Uncontrolled fire with inadequate suppression capability. On a transport carrying 48 personnel. A pause. "That's in your inspection report." It will be in my final report, which I'm filing this afternoon. Yes. Thank you, Colonel, Voss said. JAG will be coordinating with Wells's office. You may be called to testify in a military context in addition to the federal case. Understood, Daniel said. One more thing, Voss said. The general asked me to tell you directly the work you did here is the kind of work that this office was built to protect. His words. A pause. He also said something about tacos, which I did not fully understand but was asked to convey. Daniel almost laughed. Tell him I'll explain it in person. He spent the afternoon finalizing his inspection report. He worked at a desk in the corner of the operations center that Patricia's team had cleared for him, with his notebook open beside the laptop they'd provided, transferring his handwritten notes into the formal report structure, with the care of a man who understood that this document was going to be read by federal prosecutors and military judges, and potentially a jury, and that every word in it needed to be exact. The report was 47 pages when he finished. He sent it to Patricia, to Wells, to Voss, and to General Hartwell's office. Then he closed the laptop and sat for a moment with the quiet that follows the completion of something large. Tommy Garrett appeared at his elbow. You finished? The report, Daniel said. The rest of it goes on for a while without me. Tommy sat down in the chair across from him. He'd given his formal statement to Wells 3 hours ago. He looked like someone who had just finished a very long run, not broken, but emptied out in the way that comes before you fill back up. Karen Wells told me something, Tommy said. She said that my internal report from 3 months ago, even though it was buried by Reeves. He stopped. Reeves is the facilities director, Burke's brother-in-law. I know. She said that even though he buried it, the fact that I filed it creates a legal record of my good faith. She said it matters that I tried. It does matter, Daniel said. She also said, Tommy paused. She said that the people who tried to come forward here, me, Mike Dreyer now, Voss, represent a pattern of internal resistance to the scheme. She said that pattern matters for the prosecution because it shows the scheme required active suppression to continue, that people knew it was wrong and were prevented from acting on it. He looked at Daniel. She said we're not peripheral witnesses, we're central to the case. Daniel nodded. Tommy was quiet for a moment. I used to think that the moment I filed that internal report was the bravest thing I'd ever done, he said. And then I watched you get your federal document torn up in front of a crowd and just pick up the pieces and keep going. He shook his head slightly. I think I need to revise my understanding of brave. Brave isn't a measurement, Daniel said. It's a direction. You went in the right direction when it was your moment. That's what it is. Tommy looked at the table. My wife asked me last night if I was going to lose my job over this. What did you tell her? I told her I didn't know. He paused. What do you think? Daniel looked at him directly. I think you've been one of the few people in this airport doing your job honestly for 8 years. I think that is documentable and documented. I think Karen Wells knows it, and Patricia Morrow knows it, and I've said it clearly in my report. He paused. I think you should be worried about a lot of things. I don't think your job is one of them. Tommy breathed out slowly. Okay, he said. Okay. At 4:30 p.m., Rebecca Lawson appeared in the operations center door for the second time that day. She was in her uniform now, back on duty. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and there was something different in how she held herself, not smaller exactly, but less inflated, more actual. She walked to where Daniel was sitting. I've been asked to appear before the airport's internal review board tomorrow morning, she said, regarding the incident at the gate. I know, Daniel said. I was informed. My union rep says I should focus on the fact that I followed what I believe to be my professional judgment, that the document situation was ambiguous. She paused. I'm not going to do that. Daniel looked at her. What are you going to do? I'm going to tell them exactly what happened, what I did and why I did it, and what was wrong with both the action and the reasoning. She held his eyes. And whatever comes from that I'll deal with. That's the harder choice, Daniel said. Yeah, she said. I know. A pause. I wanted to tell you directly, because you're the one She stopped, started again. Because you deserve to hear it from me, and not through a report. Daniel nodded. I appreciate that. She started to turn away, then stopped. The young officer, Bennett, he's going to be okay. More than okay, Daniel said. She nodded. Good. She looked at Daniel one more time, not with the calculating assurance of the woman who'd stood at the gate 2 days ago, but with something rawer and more real. For whatever it's worth, she said. I'm sorry. It was the first time she'd said it. The word landed differently than Daniel expected, not as a formality or a performance, but as a fact. Just a plain human fact offered without decoration. It's worth something, Daniel said. She left. He sat for a moment, then picked up his notebook, turned to the last written page, added 3 lines in his small, precise hand. At 5:47 p.m., Patricia Morrow sat down across from him with 2 cups of coffee, one she set in front of him, one she kept. She looked at the state of him, the way you look at someone you've spent 72 hours in a crisis with and are trying to assess honestly. How are you doing? She asked. Daniel looked at the coffee. Tired, he said, which was true. Good tired, he added, which was also true. The Pritchard footage is going to break this case open at the federal level, Patricia said. Wells called me an hour ago. They're coordinating an arrest warrant. She paused. Gerald Pritchard doesn't know yet that we have him on tape. He's been managing the public response from his Atlanta office all day, issuing statements about full cooperation with investigators, expressing shock and concern about the safety findings. She paused. The arrest is happening tonight. Daniel absorbed that. What's his reaction going to be? His attorney is already involved, we know that. Pritchard's been on the phone with his lawyer for most of the day. Patricia looked at her coffee. But he doesn't know about the tape, and when his attorney finds out, the dynamic of this case changes entirely, because right now he's cooperating. The moment he sees himself on that footage, he stops cooperating. Then the charges need to be filed before he sees it, Daniel said. Wells already thought of that, Patricia said. The warrant is sealed. He won't know the specific evidence until the arrest. She paused. Noah Bennett put Gerald Pritchard in federal prison tonight, she said. He just doesn't know it yet. Daniel thought about that. About a 20-something officer with a tablet checking timestamps on camera logs, finding the one piece of footage that 14 months of careful planning had not accounted for. Because someone logged a camera outage that didn't happen. Because the camera kept recording. Because Noah Bennett checked the metadata when most people would have taken the log at face value. Small things. The relay fires, or it doesn't. He picked up his coffee. The transport, he said. 10 o'clock. Still on schedule, Patricia said. Andrews confirmed at 4. They're en route. He nodded. 48 people. 8 months. They were in the air right now, coming down toward a runway that was real and certified and ready, because a maintenance team had worked for 8 hours to make it that way, and a young officer had verified the metadata on a surveillance log, and a mechanic had carried his secret for 3 months before putting it down, and a compliance officer had recorded a phone call on his personal cell phone a year ago, and kept the recording, and a director had walked into a conference room voluntarily and told the truth about a meeting he should have refused to attend. And because a man in a worn canvas jacket had stood at a security gate with 4 torn pieces of paper in his pocket and not taken 1 step backward. At 9:48 p.m., Daniel stood at the window of the operations center with Patricia and Noah and Tommy, and quietly at the far side of the room, Rebecca Lawson. They watched the transport come in. It came out of the dark. The running lights first, then the shape of it, then the sound, deep and certain, and filling the tarmac air with something that felt like relief. The landing was clean. The runway held. The lights sequenced exactly the way they were supposed to sequence. The foam suppression system did not need to activate, and because it had been repaired, it could have if it needed to. The transport rolled to its designated position. The ground crew moved into place, and the door opened. They came down the steps one by one, 48 people in uniform, some of them blinking at the airport lights, some of them carrying bags over their shoulders, some of them looking at their phones already. Some of them were met at the edge of the tarmac by people who had been waiting. Some of them stopped walking when those people reached them, and the stop was the kind that happens when a body absorbs something it's been waiting a long time to feel. Daniel watched from the window. He didn't speak. Nobody in the room spoke. Tommy Garrett cleared his throat after a moment, not because he needed to, but because the room needed something human in it. Noah was standing very still watching the families on the tarmac, and Daniel could see the shape of what he was thinking by what it did to his face. That specific shift that happens when you understand not abstractly, but concretely, what the work was actually for. That's it, Noah said quietly. Not to anyone in particular, just out loud. That's it, Daniel agreed. He watched until the last person was inside. Then he picked up his jacket from the chair behind him. Put it on. Checked his inside pocket for torn pieces of paper, still folded, still there. He said goodnight to Patricia, who was already on her phone coordinating what came next. He said goodnight to Tommy, who shook his hand with the grip of a man who means it. He looked across the room at Rebecca Lawson, who met his eyes and gave him a small single nod that contained everything it needed to contain. He found Noah at the door. You heading out? Noah asked. Past time, Daniel said. Lily's already asleep. Noah held the door. Sir, can I ask you something? Go ahead. When you came in here 2 days ago, through that gate. Noah paused. When you knew who you were, and she was tearing up the document, and the crowd was watching, and none of them knew. He stopped. How did you stay that calm? Daniel thought about it honestly. Not the answer that sounded right. The actual answer. Because I knew the transport was coming, he said. I knew the runway needed to be checked. I knew what I was there to do, and none of what was happening at that gate changed what I was there to do. He looked at Noah. The document didn't matter. The crowd didn't matter. Her opinion of me didn't matter. The work mattered. He paused. When you know what you're there for, other people's noise is just noise. Noah absorbed that. Even when the noise is tearing up your authorization, Daniel almost smiled. Especially then, he said, because that's when it's loudest, and the louder it gets, the more important it is to keep moving. He walked out. The parking lot was quiet. His truck was where he'd left it 2 mornings ago, with the cracked mirror and the paint that had given up, and the booster seat in the back that he still hadn't gotten around to removing. He sat for a moment before starting the engine. He thought about Sarah. He always thought about Sarah when something big finished, not with grief exactly. Though that was still there, would probably always be there, but with a kind of gratitude that she had known who he was before all of this. Before the colonel, before the inspector, before the man who walked runways in worn jackets and spoke quietly at security gates. She had known Daniel Carter, who fixed things because fixing them mattered, and not for any reason beyond that. He started the truck. Drove home through the quiet streets past the closed storefronts and the neighborhood and the streetlight that was always slightly too bright on the corner near their house. Parked, went inside. Lily's bedroom door was open a crack, the way she liked it since she was 4 years old and had decided closed doors in the night were unacceptable. He looked in. She was asleep on her side with one arm outside the blanket and her braid fully undone hair spread across the pillow, breathing slowly. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he went to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and sat at the table in the quiet of the house where the people he loved slept safely. The torn pieces of the authorization document were still in his jacket pocket, hanging on the hook by the door. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of requesting the next inspection, the next airport on the list, the next runway to walk. But tonight the water was cold and the house was quiet, and his daughter was sleeping. And for this particular moment, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. The call came on a Friday morning 3 weeks after the transport landed. Daniel was in the middle of making Lily's lunch turkey sandwich. No mustard apple slices, a small bag of pretzels that she would eat first, and then pretend she hadn't. When his phone rang, and the number on the screen was General Hartwell's direct line. Not the office line. Not the administrative coordinator. The direct line which Hartwell used approximately 4 times a year, and only when something was either very good or very serious. Daniel set down the bread knife and picked up. Sir. Daniel. Hartwell's voice was the same as it had always been, measured, precise, carrying the specific gravity of a man who had spent 40 years making decisions that other people had to live with. I need about 15 minutes. Do you have them? I have them. 3 things, Hartwell said. First, Gerald Pritchard was indicted yesterday on 7 counts. Wire fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, and this is the one, racketeering. The RICO charge held. Wells told me this morning that Dreyer's recording and Bennett's footage together created what she called an evidentiary situation that a defense attorney would need a miracle to overcome. A pause. Pritchard's attorney is already in plea negotiation discussions. Daniel was quiet for a moment. 3 weeks of process compressed into one sentence. The other airports, all 7 are under active FAA review. 3 have already been taken out of the Meridian portfolio by emergency order. The other 4 are in various stages of compliance review. Hartwell paused. Patricia Morrow's team is leading the field inspections. She specifically requested your pre-inspection research notes. Said they were, and I'm quoting here, the clearest map I've ever been handed going into a complex investigation. She's being generous, Daniel said. She's being accurate, Hartwell said. Which is the second thing I want to talk to you about. A pause that had deliberate weight in it. I want to offer you something. A formal position. Director of Aviation Safety Integrity. A new designation created specifically to institutionalize what you did at Westbridge. Federal authority across all civilian airports with military transport contracts. Your own team. Real resources. The ability to act on pattern analysis before you need a gate incident to open a door. Daniel looked at the sandwich on the counter. The apple slices he hadn't cut yet. That's a significant offer, he said. It's a significant job, Hartwell said. And you're the only person I know who can do it the way it needs to be done. Another pause. I'm not asking you to go back to uniform. Civilian appointment. You keep your life in Millbrook. You keep Lily in her school. You work on your schedule with your team. Daniel thought about the 9 airports on the list in his notebook. The 2 that weren't in the Meridian portfolio but showed the same patterns. The question Patricia had asked the scheme extends beyond Meridian. What's the third thing? Daniel asked. The third thing, Hartwell said, and his voice shifted, not softer exactly, but more direct, the way it got when he was saying something he meant outside of official capacity. The third thing is personal. I've known you for 19 years, Daniel. I know what you left. I know why you left. And I'm not asking you to come back to any of that. He paused. I'm asking you to let the work you're already doing be what it actually is. Not a side assignment. Not something you do between school pickups. The real thing. Because it is the real thing and you know it. Daniel stood in his kitchen and looked at the bread and the apple and the small bag of pretzels. I need a week, he said. You have it, Hartwell said. But Daniel, for what it's worth, I think you've already decided. He hung up. Daniel stood there for another moment. Then he picked up the bread knife and finished making the sandwich. He put it in the bag with the apple slices and the pretzels. He wrote Lily's name on the outside of the bag in the same small, precise handwriting he used for his inspection notes, because that was the handwriting. He had all one thing, no separation between the part of him that documented federal fraud and the part that packed his daughter's lunch. Lily came downstairs at 7:22, backpack already on hair, still damp from the shower, carrying the remnant of a conversation she'd been having with herself in her room about something Daniel hadn't caught the beginning of. Can we get a dog? She said, sitting down at the table. Good morning, Daniel said. Good morning. Can we get a dog? Where is this coming from? Maya got a dog. It's a beagle. Its name is Copernicus. That's an ambitious name for a beagle. She named it after the astronomer because she wants to be a scientist. Lily accepted the lunch bag he set in front of her and looked at it to confirm it met specifications. It did. Can we? A dog requires someone to be home regularly, Daniel said. You're home regularly. I'm home between trips. Between trips counts, Lily said with the logic of a 10-year-old who has identified a loophole and intends to stand in it. She looked at him. You look like you had a serious phone call. I did. Work. Yes. She ate a pretzel, looked at him again with the eyes that were so specifically Sarah's that sometimes it still cost him something to meet them directly. The good kind of serious or the bad kind? Daniel thought about that. The kind that asks you what you actually want to do, he said. She processed that. What do you want to do? I'm thinking about it. You always figure it out, she said with the complete confidence of someone who has seen a person be competent for their entire conscious life and has drawn a general conclusion from the data. You always figure it out, and it's always the right thing. So. She finished the pretzel. Can we get a dog? He drove her to school. On the way back, he took the long route, not because he needed to, but because he needed to think, and driving was when he thought best. He drove past the turnoff for the highway and around the edge of town and back through the residential streets. And he thought about Hartwell's offer and about the 9 airports on the list and about Patricia Morrow saying the clearest map I've ever been handed and about Noah Bennett standing at the gate with a scanner that showed green and choosing to say so when it cost him something to say so. He thought about what the work actually was when he was honest about it. Not runway inspections, not report writing, not even the fraud investigation as significant as it was. The work was the moment between when something is wrong and when someone decides to say so. That gap, that distance, the thing that had to be crossed for any of it to matter. He'd been crossing it one airport at a time with a notebook and a radio. What Hartwell was offering him was the chance to shorten the gap itself, institutionally, systematically, to build something that didn't require a gate incident and a torn document and a radio call to make the truth visible. He pulled into his driveway at 8:15 and sat in the truck for exactly 4 minutes. Then he called Hartwell back. Yes, he said. Hartwell said, good. That was the whole conversation. The first thing Danielle did as the newly designated Director of Aviation Safety Integrity was call Patricia Morrow. She answered on the first ring. I heard, she said. Hartwell told you. Wells told me. Wells heard from Hartwell's office at approximately 8:30 this morning. A pause. You said yes faster than I expected. I thought about it for 4 minutes, Daniel said. In the truck, Patricia said. In your driveway. He almost asked how she knew and then didn't. I want to talk about the 2 airports on the list that aren't Meridian. I was waiting for that to be the first thing you said. He could hear her moving the sound of a chair papers. Halloway Municipal in Georgia and Cypress Point Regional in South Carolina. Both showing the same pattern irregularities you flagged in your pre-inspection research. Neither has had a military transport contract in the last 18 months, which is why they didn't hit the primary radar. But they have civilian traffic, significant civilian traffic, Patricia said. Halloway processes about 400 commercial movements per month. Cypress Point is smaller, but they handle a regional medical transport service. Medical transports. Something tightened in Daniel's chest. How soon can we get teams there? I can have Halloway by next Wednesday, Patricia said. Cypress Point by the following Monday. Make it the following Wednesday for both, Daniel said. I'm going to both personally for the initial walk. A pause. You're going to walk both runways yourself. Until I have a team I've trained, yes, Daniel said. I'm not sending anyone into a situation I haven't assessed. Patricia was quiet for a moment. You know, most people who get a directorship spend the first month setting up the office. The systems don't care about the office, Daniel said. She laughed, a short, real one. No, she said. They don't. The second call was to Karen Wells. Wells was in the middle of something. When she answered, he could hear the controlled background noise of an active legal office, but she stepped away from it immediately, which told him the case was still front of mind. Pritchard's attorneys made a formal plea offer this morning, she said without preamble. They want to negotiate the RICO charge down to conspiracy, in exchange for full cooperation and testimony against 3 Meridian board members, who we haven't yet been able to directly connect to the scheme. 3 board members, Daniel said. Pritchard didn't build this alone, Wells said. That's what we've suspected. This is the confirmation. She paused. If he cooperates, we get the board members. If he doesn't, we go to trial on the full RICO charge, which based on the evidence we're confident of winning. But trials take time, and they take resources, and they give defense attorneys room to work. She paused again. I wanted your read. Daniel thought about it. About Burke in a holding facility. About the facility's director whose threat was on tape. About Mike Dreyer's daughter, who was 12 years old and doing well. About Tommy Garrett's 2 kids in college. What do the board members represent? He asked. In terms of scale, if Pritchard's account holds the 3 board members directed the scheme across all 7 airports and potentially 2 additional investment vehicles we haven't yet identified, Wells said. We're talking about a financial infrastructure for systemic safety fraud that could extend significantly beyond aviation. Take the deal, Daniel said. I was leaning that way, Wells said. Wanted your read because you understand the safety dimension better than anyone in my office. The goal is the system, Daniel said, not the individual. If Pritchard gives you the board members and the board members give you the infrastructure, you can dismantle something that would have kept happening at airports we never found. That's what I thought, Wells said. Thank you, Colonel. A pause. Director. He was still getting used to that word. He let it land without comment. How's Mike Dreyer? I spoke with him yesterday, Wells said. The NDA has been formally voided. He's been retained as a consulting witness for the prosecution. He's also... She paused, and her voice shifted slightly from professional into something more human. He called me to tell me his daughter had a clean checkup last week. I don't know why he told me that, but I'm glad he did. Daniel understood exactly why Mike Dreyer had told his attorney that his daughter had a clean checkup. Because when you've been carrying the weight of a bad decision long enough, and the weight finally lifts you, share good news with the people who helped you put it down. I'm glad too, Daniel said. He spent the rest of the morning in his home office, a small room off the hallway that had been a guest room until it became the room where he kept his notebooks, which had happened gradually and without formal decision. He pulled out the fresh notebook he'd started the day after Westbridge, opened it to the first page. At the top, he wrote in his small, precise hand, Halloway Municipal, Cypress Point Regional. And below that, the names of 4 other airports from a different ownership group that had been flagging inconsistencies in his research for the past 6 months. He wrote for an hour, organizing what he knew, mapping what he needed to verify, building the approach the way he always built approaches methodically from the data outward without assumption. At 11:30 a.m. his phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. Georgia area code. He answered. Carter. A pause. Colonel Carter, my name is Dennis Hale. I'm the general manager at Halloway Municipal Airport. The voice was careful, controlled in the way voices get when a person has been coached to be controlled. I understand you'll be visiting our facility next week. That's correct. I wanted to call and introduce myself, and to let you know that we intend to be fully cooperative with your inspection. Another pause. I also wanted to say that if there are any specific concerns or areas of focus, I'm happy to discuss them in advance so we can be prepared. Daniel was quiet for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to be deliberate. Mr. Hale, I appreciate the call. When I arrive at Halloway, I'll be coming in the same way I come into every facility. Through the main access point with my authorization documentation, and I'll be walking the systems in the order and manner I determine appropriate when I'm there. He paused. I don't share my inspection focus in advance. That's not how I work. A longer pause. Of course I understand. I just wanted to... I know what you wanted to do, Daniel said. Not unkindly, plainly. I'll see you Wednesday. He hung up. He added a note to the Halloway page in his notebook GM called to pre-negotiate scope. Cross-reference records request advance to FAA regional office before arrival. He'd been doing this long enough to know what that call meant and what it didn't mean. It didn't necessarily mean Halloway was another Westbridge, but it meant someone there was anxious enough to try to shape the inspection before it happened. And people who had nothing to hide didn't usually try to shape inspections before they happened. He picked up his pen and kept writing. At 2:15 p.m., he got a text from Noah Bennett. Just 4 words. Check your email, please. He opened his email. Noah had forwarded him a message from Westbridge Regional's Human Resources Department. A formal notice of promotion from Security Officer Level 2 to Security Officer Level 3 with a merit citation attached. The citation, which was 3 paragraphs long, referenced the events of the inspection week specifically and used the phrase, "demonstrated integrity under institutional pressure," twice. Below the forwarded email, Noah had written, "Thought you should know. I also wanted to say thank you. You didn't have to do what you did at that gate, and you didn't have to defend me in the report, but you did. It mattered." Daniel read it twice. Then he typed back, "The relay fired, that's all. Congratulations, Officer Bennett. Now get back to work." He sent it. Then sat for a moment, and there was something in the room that wasn't quite silence, and wasn't quite sound, just the quality of a thing that had happened, and been completed, and mattered. I thought about something he hadn't let himself think about much since Westbridge. About the morning at the gate before Rebecca Lawson had come out of the side booth. The specific 2 seconds when he'd placed the authorization document on the counter and watched Noah Bennett run it through the scanner and seen the green light come up. He'd watched Noah's face in that moment, the slight surprise, the recalibration, the decision to read the document fully before making any determination. That had told him everything he needed to know about Noah Bennett. Not the badge number moment, as important as that was. That earlier moment. The moment when Noah had just done the job correctly, without audience, without anyone watching him do it. That was character. The badge number was courage. But you needed the character first. He filed that thought away with the other things he was learning about how to build a team. The Westbridge hearing was scheduled for the 3rd Thursday of the month. Daniel drove up alone in the same truck with the same cracked mirror, arriving at the same parking lot where this had all started 3.5 weeks ago. The hearing was a joint session Airport Internal Review Board, FAA Compliance Division, and 2 attorneys from Wells's office. It was not a criminal proceeding. It was an institutional accountability review, which was a different animal, quieter, more procedural, more about the structure than the individuals, though the individuals were very much present. Daniel was the first witness called. He testified for 47 minutes. He covered the inspection findings, the documentation evidence, his conversation with Tommy Garrett, the falsified records, the shell company, the surveillance footage, the pattern analysis that had preceded his arrival. He was precise, and he was comprehensive, and he was, as he always was in formal testimony, completely without emotional editorializing. When Wells's attorney asked him to characterize the institutional conditions that had allowed the scheme to persist, he said, "A culture where authority was confused with accountability, where the people with the most authority took the least accountability, and the people with the least authority were the ones who tried to maintain it." The attorney asked him to clarify. "The scheme persisted," Daniel said, "because the people responsible for oversight, management, executive level, the board, treated oversight as a compliance exercise rather than a genuine function. When the compliance exercise gets in the way of profit, you falsify the exercise. The people who actually understood what was at stake, the maintenance workers, the safety officers, eventually even a security officer at the front gate, they were the ones who tried to hold the line. They just didn't have the authority to make it stick." He paused. "What I'm building now in the new role is a structure where that line has institutional weight behind it, where the people who try to hold it don't have to do it alone." The hearing room was quiet for a moment. Rebecca Lawson testified after him. She was in full uniform. She sat with her hands folded on the table, and she told the review board exactly what she had told Daniel. She was going to tell them the complete account, without softening, without the defense her union representative had suggested. She described her reasoning at the gate, her override of the scanner, her decision to tear the document. She used the phrase "I was wrong" 6 times in 40 minutes of testimony, and each time she used it, it sounded more certain than the last. When the board chair asked her what she would do differently, she said, "I would trust the process over my own certainty. My certainty has been built by experience, and experience is valuable. But experience can also calcify into assumption. And assumption is what happened at that gate. I assumed I knew who he was before he had the chance to be who he was." She paused. "The scanner told me the truth. I chose not to hear it. That is the part I have to own, and that I will own. Daniel watched her from across the room. He thought about the woman who had laughed at him at the gate, and the woman sitting in that chair, and they were the same person, which was the most complicated and most human thing. He knew how to hold in his mind that people were capable of being both those things, and that what determined which one showed up on any given day was nothing more and nothing less than the choices they made in the moments that cost something. The board deliberated for 2 hours. Their findings issued late that afternoon were as follows. Harrison Burke and the facilities director were referred for criminal prosecution, which was already underway. 3 additional employees who had signed off on falsified records were placed on administrative leave pending further review. Gerald Foss received a formal censure for failure to report his knowledge of the scheme, with a note in the findings that his voluntary disclosure and subsequent cooperation had been considered in the determination. Tommy Garrett received a formal commendation and was named interim head of facilities maintenance effective immediately. Noah Bennett's merit promotion was ratified by the board with an additional commendation for exemplary judgment under difficult institutional pressure, and Rebecca Lawson. The board suspended her for 30 days without pay. They required her to complete a professional conduct review and a retraining program. And then, this was the part that surprised people who expected the outcome to be more severe. They offered her a path back. With conditions. With oversight. With the specific acknowledgement in the written findings that her decision to testify fully and without mitigation had been noted and weighed. She read the findings at a table in the hallway outside the hearing room, and Daniel was walking past when she looked up. 30 days, she said. Yes, he said. And then back. If you meet the conditions. Yes. She looked at the findings document. I expected worse. I know, Daniel said. The board decided that the person you were at the hearing mattered as much as the person you were at the gate. He paused. I'd agree with that. She looked at him. You testified before I did. Did you say anything on my behalf? Daniel looked at her evenly. I testified about what I found and what happened. I described every person's actions accurately. He paused. Including yours at the gate. And including yours in the break room and on the tarmac and the surveillance box you compiled and what you said to me on the 3rd morning. Rebecca absorbed that. You told them about the box. And the index you wrote by hand on yellow legal paper, Daniel said. And the camera outage correlation you found in an hour. And the fact that you came back to the airport on your day off to watch the maintenance team work. He met her eyes. I testified accurately, Rebecca. That's all. She looked away. Looked back. Thank you. Be the person from the hearing room, he said. Every day. Not just the days it counts. He picked up his jacket. That's all any of us can do. He drove home through the afternoon. His phone rang at 4:47 p.m. The number was one he'd added to his contacts 3 weeks ago, Mike Dreyer. Colonel Carter, I wanted to call you before you heard it somewhere else. Mike's voice was steady in a way it hadn't been the first call. I've been offered a position. Safety Compliance Director at a regional airport in Tennessee. Different ownership group from Meridian, no connection to the scheme. Clean facility from what I can see. A pause. I asked Patricia to look at their records before I accepted. She said they're solid. That's good news, Mike. I wanted to ask you something, Mike said. Before I took it. I wanted to ask if you thought... He stopped. I know I can't undo the NDA. I know that the years I was quiet happened. But do you think a person can... He paused again, looking for the right words. Do you think you can do the right job after you failed at the right job? Daniel drove for a moment without speaking. I think, he said slowly, that the job doesn't remember your failures. The job only knows what you do today. The systems don't hold grudges. The runways don't know your history. He paused. The question isn't whether you failed before. The question is whether you understand what the job actually is, and whether you're willing to do it at full cost when the cost comes. He paused again. You recorded that phone call, Mike. You kept those records for 2 years when it would have been easier to lose them. You called Karen Wells at 11 p.m. the night your NDA was voided. He let that sit for a moment. You understand what the job is. You've understood it for a long time. You just didn't have the protection to act on it. He paused. You have it now. A silence. Not empty. Full. Thank you, Mike said. I'm going to take the position. Good, Daniel said. If you ever find something that concerns you, you have my number now. I do, Mike said, and there was something in his voice, not relief exactly, but the specific quality that comes when a person knows they're not alone in a thing anymore. Thank you, Colonel. Director, Daniel said. A pause. Sorry. It's Director now, Daniel said. Though I'd be okay with Daniel. Mike laughed, a short, genuine one. Director Daniel, he said. Okay. He was almost home when Patricia called. Pritchard took the deal, she said. Daniel pulled to the side of the road. When? An hour ago. Wells called me immediately. Patricia's voice had the quality of someone delivering news they've been holding carefully. Full cooperation. He's giving us the 3 board members and 2 additional investment vehicles that we didn't know about. One of them, and this is the part I needed to tell you personally, one of them is a holding company with interests in 11 regional airports across the southeast. Daniel was very still. 11 airports, Patricia said. Some overlap with your research, some we didn't know about. A pause. You were right. It was bigger than Meridian. He looked at the notebook in his bag on the passenger seat, the fresh one, the 9 airports he'd listed, and the 2 that weren't Meridian. He had been tracking a piece of something that was larger than the piece. How fast can we move on the 11? He asked. That's what I'm calling about, Patricia said. Wells wants a coordinated inspection rollout all 11 within a 90-day window, so nobody has time to clean up before we arrive. She needs your team to lead the inspection side. A pause. Which means you need a team. I'm building one, Daniel said. Fast. Faster, he said. The 90 days starts when Pritchard's cooperation agreement is formalized, Patricia said. Wells estimates that's 2 to 3 weeks. Daniel did the math. I'll have a team in 2 weeks. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Do you sleep? She asked. Between trips, Daniel said. She laughed. All right, Director. I'll send you the 11 facility profiles tonight. He pulled back onto the road, the last mile home. He drove slowly, not because of traffic, but because he needed the space to let the scale of it settle. 11 airports, and beyond those whatever the board members led to, and beyond that whatever structure had built Meridian and its imitators, and the culture that made it possible to treat safety as a ledger item and passengers as abstractions. He'd been walking runways one at a time with a notebook. Now he was building something that could walk them all. He parked in the driveway, sat in the truck for a moment. He thought about a foggy morning 3.5 weeks ago when he'd pulled into a different parking lot in this same truck with this same cracked mirror and walked toward a security gate with a document in his pocket and a radio on his belt, and no particular expectation that the day would be anything other than a routine inspection. He thought about 4 torn pieces of paper. He reached into his jacket pocket and took them out, still folded together, still carrying the crease lines from the pocket they'd lived in for weeks. He unfolded them carefully on the steering wheel and looked at them. The Air Force seal split across 2 pieces. His clearance codes split across 2 others. The barcode at the bottom intact on one fragment because that was the part the scanner had already read. It was just paper. Torn paper, federal grade with an embossed seal and a barcode that had shown green twice. But it was also the moment when someone had decided in half a second that he wasn't worth believing, and been wrong about everything. He folded the pieces back together, put them in his pocket. He got out of the truck. Lily was at the kitchen table doing homework when he came in, and she looked up with the immediate assessment of a person who has been monitoring arrival times. You're on time, she said with the specific approval of someone for whom this was not always a given. I am, he agreed. How was the hearing thing? It went well. Did the right people get in trouble? He thought about the board findings, about Rebecca's 30 days, about Tommy's commendation, about the 3 employees on administrative leave who had signed documents they knew were false. The right things happened, he said. Whether they're the right people depends on what they do next. Lily considered that with the seriousness she applied to things that deserved it. That seems fair, she said. He put his jacket on the hook by the door. Dad, Lily said. Yeah. The serious phone call this morning. The one that asked you what you wanted to do. She looked at him with Sarah's eyes. What did you decide? He leaned against the counter, looked at her 10 years old doing homework at the kitchen table, completely unself-conscious about asking the questions that mattered. I decided to do the job right, he said. The way it needs to be done. Not just one airport at a time, all of them. She thought about that. Is that going to mean more trips? Some, he said. But I'll be home. I'll always come home. She looked at him for a moment, then nodded the way she nodded when something settled. Okay, she said. Can we get a dog? He laughed. A real one from somewhere uncomplicated. Let me get my team hired first. That means yes eventually, she said, and went back to her homework. He stood in the kitchen and watched her for a moment. This person who was the best thing he had ever done, who would never fully know the runways her father walked, or the systems he kept working, or the 48 people who came home one October night because the foam suppression housing was replaced at 3:52 in the afternoon by a team that worked because one man had walked a tarmac with a notebook and refused to leave when someone told him he didn't belong there. She would know her father. That was enough. That was more than enough. He took out his notebook and opened it to the new page. 11 airports. He picked up his pen and started mapping. 3 weeks after a security officer laughed and tore a federal document in half at a regional airport gate. The man she had tried to dismiss sat at his kitchen table and began drawing the architecture of a system that would protect hundreds of airports across the Southeast. Not because he needed the credit. Not because the title mattered. Not because he had anything to prove to anyone at any gate anywhere. Because the runway didn't care who walked it. The runway only cared whether the work got done right. And Daniel Carter had never once walked away from work that needed doing. The torn document sat in his jacket pocket on the hook by the door. 4 pieces of federal paper that had been destroyed to prove he was nothing, and had instead become the first evidence in a case that reached from a foggy regional tarmac all the way to the offices of men who had built empires on the assumption that no one was watching closely enough to catch them. Someone had been watching. Someone in a worn canvas jacket driving a truck with a cracked mirror packing a turkey sandwich for his daughter every morning, and walking runways every afternoon, and writing small precise notes in a spiral notebook that turned out to be the clearest map anyone had ever seen. That was the truth about real power. It did not announce itself. It did not wear what you expected. It did not need your belief to function. It only needed the work done right, done, honestly done, without flinching when someone tried to convince you that you didn't belong in the room. Daniel Carter had never needed anyone's permission to belong anywhere. He had only ever needed the work. And the work, as always, was waiting.